Yeah, thanks, Amish. Hello to everyone. Good morning. I mean, thank you for having me here, and I think congratulations to Kantipur and the organization and the many people behind this, because we all used to take trips around the world and talk about Nepal, in Delhi, in Beijing, in the US, in Europe, and I certainly do that a lot. But it's really refreshing to come to Kathmandu and discuss the world here in Kathmandu, and I think this is really an important contribution to start, shifting tables a bit, and instead of Nepal becoming a little object thrown around, a little piece between a big geopolitical, geoeconomic chess, we actually have a more greater agency here in Kathmandu to talk about the world and very important issues which are going to affect Nepal in the future. I mean, your question on connectivity, I think the last one is the most important one, and I'll come to India within that. We've seen what happened between India and Pakistan over the last few days, and is going to happen. Tragedy, which is based in the partition of 1947, the subcontinent between India and Pakistan. But we always talk about partition between India and Pakistan, but actually what happened in this region is a fundamental economic partition, social partition, cultural partition among several countries. So it's a paradox that in the 1950s, this region was more integrated in absolute terms, not in relative terms. It was easier to cross borders. It was easier to move capital, to move ideas, to move people around this region than today. That's the paradox we are in. So the whole world became more interdependent since the 1950s. The whole world is more connected, and South Asia has become more disconnected within and more isolated from the rest of the world. And that has started to change from the 1990s, in particular because India started to open up its economy, and several countries around it too since the 1990s. And that has completely shifted, therefore, the mindset, I think, of several actors who were dealing with the neighborhood. Now, this poses a challenge because traditionally you looked at the region through the prism of politics and security, and India played an important role in that, and was always very worried about any other powers in this region. And now you're putting the emphasis on connectivity, interdependence, proximity with other countries. And the challenge is huge. The World Bank just came out with a report late last year saying the actual cost of this partition of non-trade barriers and political barriers to trade in South Asia is around $6 billion in total, of which $3 billion are just India, Pakistan, if they had actually an open economic relationship and based on a good political relationship. And I can think of many other such partitions affecting South Asia today. If you look at the region of Humla here in Nepal, wonderful work now coming up on how Humla was deeply connected with Tibet and China as an economic corridor connecting the Tibetan plateau and the rest of China to the Bay of Bengal. The whole Himalayan region, therefore, was always a transition area, a belt between the northern Tibetan, Chinese hinterland, if you want, and the Indian Ocean region. And I think that's upon us now to reconnect that region. And there will be challenges, like you said. I think it's an adjustment for many people. It's an adjustment also for Nepal, which I think now has a stable government, strong government, which is committed to a strong foreign policy. It needs to, instead of just looking at India, which was generally the only place you could look at, now you have China coming in. You have many other countries. We saw the debates about the Indo-Pacific happening over the last months here in Kathmandu, very heated debates. But I'd say the more the merrier for Nepal. The tradition of Nepal's foreign policy has always been one of diversification, of what's called Nepalese non-alignment, which means that you don't want to depend on a single country. You don't want to depend only on India, nor do you want to depend only on China or on India and China. You want to have the Japanese investing here. You want to have connectivity with Southeast Asia, an economic growth area in Asia. You want to have the Europeans supporting the development of Nepal, and they have done that very well over the last years. And you have the Americans too. So I think that tradition of which King Mahendra in the 1960s used to call dynamic neutralism, it's not exactly sort of complete neutralism, but means sort of you're going to adjust and play around the game of balancing all countries and bringing them in actively into Nepal, is the most productive way for Nepal until 2030.
Thank you, Dr. Xavier. When we talk about reforms in Nepal, it's not that we've not had a history of reforms. Between 1986 and 1996, we've had growth rates averaging 5%, which have been the highest historically. We've had, even now, one of the largest sectors where we've seen improvements is in digital connectivity in telecommunications. In fact, by 2025, compared to its neighboring countries, the penetration of internet and mobile connections are predicted to be much higher in Nepal. Uh, we will have about 124% mobile connection penetration by 2025, while India's mobile connection will be 98%. I want to go back and ask Dr. Wagle, how has Nepal achieved this? How has Nepal been able to achieve significant economic revolutions in certain sectors while lagging behind in, let's say, infrastructure or capital investment? Does it require a thinking beyond existing models?
Thank you. I think Dr. Lohani is here, so it's apt that you refer to the economic reforms starting in the mid-80s. I think he initiated some of those reforms, especially in the banking sector, where Nepal is doing reasonably well. That burst of early reforms in the 80s, propelled by some sort of an economic crisis, was continued after the big political change in 1990. The tragedy with Nepal has been that we've not been able to sustain that, right? So after the mid-90s, late 90s, that sort of petered out. And we know why. The conflict intervened, a lot of instability, palace massacre, a lot of external factors came into play. But you're right that in certain sectors, we've managed to see the country leapfrog. That is partly because of an openness, policy openness, and a dynamism of a select policy reformers and leaders, but also the technology was on our side. So in 1991, the entire country of Nepal had just 71,560 telephone lines, landlines. What happened after that? Well, mobile telephony became much more affordable. The technology aided us. But it's not enough just to have the technology out there, right? You need that receptivity. You need that willingness to really engage with the rest of the world. I mean, North Korea had a similar choice, but it didn't make that choice, right? So today, you're right. I think 30 million cell phone subscriptions exist. 20 million active users, according to the Nepal Telecom Authority. So that leapfrogging has been possible because of both internal and external circumstances that have been in our favor. On the other hand, the deeper reforms that we expect in other sectors, that needs a lot of complementarity, right? It's not enough for individual champions to emerge. So Kulman Gising was able to get many things done in the electricity sector, but to get the entire economy moving, growing on a healthy 7, 8, 9% per annum on a sustained basis for another 12, 15 years, you need many factors to be aligned. And that's where the challenge is. That's where we need political stability, a larger visioning on the part of the leadership, the private sector to also toe the line. So a lot of things need to be aligned, as I said. The stars need to be aligned. And leading up to 2030, there are 3 or 4 big changes that we need to anticipate, right? It is very likely that Nepal will begin to age before becoming rich. That's a profound shift. That's a big thing that we need to internalize. Beginning 2028, we will become an aging society. We will have another 25, 26 years before we become aged. So there's a narrow window of 25, 26 years. But many countries that mimic or replicate this kind of a demographic profile are already richer. So Indonesia comes to mind, which will also enter its phase of aging around the same time as Nepal, leading up to 2030. But it's already 5 times richer than us. Other countries, Malaysia, Japan, which did this rapid transformation from an aging to an aged society, did at much higher levels of income. The second profound shift that we need to prepare for is we will most likely urbanize before having meaningfully industrialized. So the share of manufacturing, which is a subset of industry, is just 6%. Now let's assume that things go very well and the sectors that Nepal has a comparative advantage, we really scale up. And go up to 12% of GDP in manufacturing. That's still not enough to create the kind of jobs to match the young demographic profile that we will face. The third big shift that I think we need to really prepare for is going forward, Nepal's policy space will be constricted much more by the unknown disruptive technologies in the energy sector, for example, and in manufacturing, the automation, the AI and all that, than the known processes of catch-up and the advantage of backwardness. So, we try to look at how countries prospered in the 20th century. It's not going to be terribly helpful going forward. So we need to prepare for those uncertainties, the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, as one defense secretary memorably put it. So a lot of things going ahead, but I'll come to those later.
I'll move to Sanksha. We've had a very interesting discussion in the past couple of years about sustainable development in Nepal. I mean, the best example I could give is of Nijgarh Airport, where there is a growing sort of discourse going around how many trees are going to be cut for the airport. These, as Nepal progresses, as there are more infrastructure projects that will continue to happen in Nepal, these debates will continue to come up. What I want to ask Sanksha is sustainable development a misnomer? I mean, should a low-income country like Nepal, where growth is essential, but we'll have to exploit our natural resources, what should it do? What sort of experiences can you tell us from, let's say, China, or let's say other countries around the world? What do you think?
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's a great honor to be here and incredible opportunity for me to learn so much about Nepal and to be here with all of you at the Conclave. I think we've touched on some really interesting point, and today we're talking about 2030, about the future, which is one of my favorite topics, because it's so unknown and because there's so much uncertainty, as was just mentioned by my panelists. So they're saying that the future is already here, but it's unevenly distributed, right? When we talk about sustainable development and looking at 2030, which is only 10 years down the road, by the way, and we're talking about sustainability in 2019, not in 1999 or even earlier. So I don't think there needs to be more debate about whether sustainability is possible. It's a requirement and it's imperative that all of our growth has to be green and we have to be resilient. Yesterday in the keynote speeches and the youth panel, we talk about Nepal being a very resilient society. We have gone through political transformation. We are going through these economic and social transitions, and the environmental transformation and having this relationship between human and nature, how to actually utilize natural resources for economic growth, but also sustainable economic growth. I think it's really what Nepal is going to teach other countries. So when China has developed 30 years ago, we have pretty much sacrificed a lot of our ecosystems to trade for economic growth. And we all know right now what the situation is like, and China has shown that if you have the willpower, you can clean up pretty quickly with air pollution, with food safety, and the Chinese policy right now on ecological civilization is trying to address those roles. But I think, as was mentioned with leapfrogging technologies, Nepal doesn't have to go through the same way of development before conservation. I think these two things can really go hand in hand. And in terms of climate change, which is really going to be a defining characteristic of our age right now and of the next 10 years of growth, all of the natural disasters that we're seeing these days, whether it's forest fire, it's droughts or flooding, will all be exacerbated by climate change. So in all kinds of policy, we must take this into account because we're tackling these so-called wicked problems, right? And we don't know what's gonna help and what isn't. And an earthquake or a natural disaster, it's not about whether it will happen, it's about when it will happen and whether we can be prepared when such a thing happens. So all the rubrics of society, whether it's economic growth, whether it's social resilience, whether it's community resilience, has to be taken these issues into account. So as we're thinking about this uncertainty in the future, and I think there's a few sectors in Nepal that really should address environmental issues. first of all, agriculture and forestry. And forestry is what Nepal is already doing quite well. And because Nepal doesn't have a huge greenhouse emission, adaptation and being able to account for carbon emission of other countries, there has been some good examples around that. In terms of infrastructure and energy, of course, Nepal is going to advance greatly in the next 10 years for it to achieve middle income status. But because of the diverse in opinion, because of the debate that's allowed to happen in public spaces, we might be able to avoid some of the consequences we have seen in other places, the social impact, the environmental cost of big infrastructure projects, as you just mentioned. And thirdly, tourism. And we all know that the mountains of Nepal, the huge diversity of flora and fauna, and the different ecosystems is a great attraction to people all over the world. But how do we develop responsible and sustainable tourism without compromising the social and environment? I think those are really interesting areas to explore. And personally, in the next few years, I might be bringing students and business leaders and Chinese philanthropists to learn from the cases in Nepal and how do we tackle these issues of sustainable development and climate change. So very excited to be here and be in this conversation.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to remind the audience that all questions need to be posted on the app. Please keep them short. Please also tell us who you want the question to be answered by, or if there are two panelists that you would like the questions to be directed to, please mention that as well. I'd like to bring the topic back to economics. The whole talk about middle income status becoming richer, we forget one idea, which is income inequalities. A recent report told us the income of the richest 10% of Nepalese is more than 3 times that of the poorest 40%. We have one of the highest Gini coefficients, which measures income inequalities in the world. We have urban incomes are consistently more than twice that of rural incomes. We have gender, land, ethnic inequalities still happening. What I want to ask Dr. Song is that we've spoken about these structural changes. How do you think Nepal can address these dual challenges of having economic growth while addressing income inequalities? Do you think that solving or wealth redistribution requires a new idea like UBI, like universal basic income, something that Finland has tried, something that India wants to try out in this budget? There is a new policy for farmers. Do you think Nepal needs to move towards a universal basic income to resolve income inequalities?
This is a very big question. So actually, power imbalance and structural inequalities underlie the transition of the constitution in Nepal to the federation. I believe actually this is the underlying reason why Nepal chose the federation. And if you can make a federalism work, in my view, then you can address power imbalance and inequalities very much, because the federations given the power to the provinces and the local governments, and they can take care of all their citizens in their geographic areas. And then, in terms of this universal basic income, you probably already see some modified version of this universal basic income in the interim budget. India just released at the beginning of this month. And they give 6,000 rupees to the farmers with only less than 2 acres of land. So it's some sort of basic income support to the poor families. But universal basic income, actually, the idea came from developed countries, Finland. And universal basic income could be quite costly, because if you want to be meaningful, then you have to give quite a decent amount to lift the people, the household out of the poverty. And also you might encounter moral hazard problems. And for Nepal, at this stage of development, my personal view is you need mobilize the resources, because resources are very limited. Government resources are quite limited. And then you have to balance whether you want to use that resources to redistribute from the rich to the poor, or you use these resources for the development of the country, to invest in, say, infrastructure, to invest in the state, because you want to the state to be effective, then you have to invest in state capacity. Yeah, we always talk about Nepal is very slow to implement projects. Yeah, India has also got some responsibility. We initiated this Malanchi water supply project. It's already almost 20 years. It's still not completed. So the state itself is not so effective. But it also, the state itself doesn't have the capacity. And you need to have a consensus to see whether the people, the public, wants the investment in the state capacity in order for the state to have the effectiveness to implement projects, to protect every individual's rights. So that's a balance. I think that would be the people's choice. Whether they like redistribution or you like some investment, mobilize resources to invest in the state. And then sometimes for India, because you're a big neighbor here, and some people call India's development model is a precocious development model. It's much too much. And then they pay the cost of democracy. Because democracy, you have to redistribute wealth, and economic growth probably, as a result, would suffer. So there's many issues. But I believe, actually, if you make federalism work, then inequality issues would go away. Because the federalism basically is to tackle inequality. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Song. I want to come back to Constantino. Humla was a very interesting case study that you brought up, because I had recently there last year, and we discussed the idea of trade and how locals are adapting to this idea of inter-country trade and conducting business in China. We are also talking about a train coming from China to Kathmandu. We're talking about a train coming from India to Kathmandu. You just mentioned that we've historically been a sort of a transit point between India and Tibet, or India and China. Do you think that sort of situation where Nepal becomes a transit state between India and China is possible within the current dimensions of the Sino-Indian relationship? Do you think that Nepal can emerge as a hub, as what Xi Jinping's 2+1 proposal was? Do you think there is enough sort of foreign policy or political will in both countries and within the current dimensions for that to occur?
Yes, but I think, transit state sounds very, again, subject. Nepal becomes sort of this route through which you circulate, and Indian capital goes up and Chinese laborers come down, or investment. It shouldn't be transit state. You should be a pivot state. Nepal's been a pivot state. Nepal's been the center of an economy in the largest sense for several centuries. And it must reconstitute that role as an actual sort of pivot state which has relationships with, forget countries, with different regions, Himalayan regions. Sujeev speaks about East-South Asia, with the region northeast of India, with Sikkim, with Bangladesh, towards Myanmar. So we have to go beyond these sort of nationalisms of borders and see Nepal as a larger integrated economy into this wider region, whether it's South Asia, East-South Asia, the Chinese hinterland, Tibet, China, Central Asia, the Bay of Bengal, the Indian Ocean region. That is the natural space which Nepal has actually occupied from the 18th century onwards and before, and needs to recover. And therefore, instead of 2+1, it should be 1+2. I mean, let's put the emphasis on Nepal. It's important that Nepal starts articulating this policy. And I go back to the first democratically elected prime minister of this country, B.P. Koirala, who had a policy called, his foreign policy was open doors policy. And he saw the benefits of diversifying relations and allowing Nepal to have its own proper, independent relations with all these countries. Leads me to another issue, which, I mean, Dr. Song spoke about the importance of federalism, political transition. You spoke about the importance of a public debate about environment and stakeholders in that issue. And then you mentioned this cost of democracy. And I think that's something which needs to be discussed quite openly, which is it really a cost? Is it a cost in the short term or in the long term? Is it a benefit? I think there's a fundamental relation, I think, which we've seen over humanity between economic development and political institutions. In particular, political institutions that are open, diverse, and transparent, accountable to the people. That's called democracy. That's called pluralism in terms of institutions. And Nepal has gone through so much pain over the last decades. I mean, absolutism in terms of royal autocracy, two pro-democracy movements, a devastating civil war, one of the most unstable governments, constantly changing in the 1990s, constitutional instability the last years, and it's extremely important to build the institutions that are open, transparent, accountable, democratically elected, because I think that will be actually a benefit and not a cost. It will benefit in the long term for Nepal to grow more sustainably. And obviously, these are tensions. The jury's out, and we have two fundamentally different models, the Chinese and the Indian model. And we have our preferences, personal or not. We have a different scholarly assessments of which model is going to be prevailing. A centralized state-led model in which if you're a citizen, you have no access to your data, private data, for example, in China. Or one in India where the data privacy issues is being discussed, debated, going to Supreme Court, being fought out, the government brings it out without a law, the Aadhaar system, for example, now is having an issue. So these are two very different systems, and I think we're all, and in this day and age, we're all tending towards immediatism, growth, and that makes sense. Nepal is growing very quickly, people want now. They don't want to wait for tomorrow. But at the same time, I caution to the importance of moderation in political institutions, which I think in the long term will prevail. So it's up on us to, I think, explain that, whether it's the Nepalese government, whether it's scholars in us here, to explain to people and say, you know, you want to have your food on the table now, but the way you get it is going to fundamentally constrain your choices in the future.
There's a very interesting point you raised about how do you get the food on your table. I mean, in Nepal today, we're seeing high growth rates, but the paradox is a lot of our growth rate is being fueled by remittance incomes. We know that about 4 million people in Nepal, out of a workforce of 14 million, are working abroad. Despite this, we have low unemployment rates simply because a lot of people are working abroad. The unemployment rate within the country is about 35.8%. What I want to ask Dr. Wagle is, the Prime Minister has recently started a new employment scheme intended to halt this labor migration. What sort of targets do you think this employment scheme can achieve, number one? Number two, do you think there are some priority sectors where the labor can be directed to within the country rather than going abroad?
On the Prime Minister's employment program, I think it's a misnomer. It's not an employment creating or employment generating program. And I've told the Minister of Labor twice to please set the expectations correctly. If he's announcing that I'm going to create jobs for every working adult in the country, and then 6 months or 12 months down the road that is not going to be realized, we're going to have lots of protests on the streets. So I've told this to some of the leaders. It's actually a social protection program that is born out of a commitment that we made in the Constitution. We've very ambitiously said we're going to honor the right to work, right? So it's in that spirit that this particular piece of legislation was introduced. In India, you're familiar with this, the Mahatma Gandhi National Employment Guarantee Scheme. There in the Act itself, this is to provide jobs for willing and able working adults for at least up to 100 days in a year for unskilled manual work, right? So something similar is what is being sought to be replicated here. So of all the available working adults, people who are willing, or the state offers them work which is unskilled and manual in nature, if the state cannot guarantee that jobs to people from households who don't have any other working adult working, or who don't have anyone working overseas. So the criteria, the filter is extremely extensive. So it's going to be a miracle just to come out of this, this whole laundry list of eligibility. Then, if the state offers you the work that you're not interested, then you don't qualify. So let's say you are willing to work in this manual unskilled work, but the state was unable to provide. Then they will give you 50% of the minimum wage that you would have got had you been fully employed for 100 days. So it's a very restrictive, very modest social protection program. I don't see this as creating jobs and halting this massive this epic outflow of adults leaving the country. Nonetheless, from a social protection point of view, this is a welcome initiative that is perfectly aligned with what we've written in the Constitution. The larger and the more substantive initiative has to come from the economic momentum that we generate elsewhere in the economy. There is no substitute to creating jobs in the private sector. I mean, you're right, 15, 16 million of the 15, 16 million working adults, probably 1 million are in full-time education. Probably 5 to 6 million at least are working overseas. Of those that remain, you look at the official statistics and it's really depressing. 500,000 come into the labor force every year. Last year, Lok Seva Ayog, the Public Service Commission, created 9,500 jobs out of close to 1 million applicants, right? And there was Sikshit Bhatta here yesterday telling that Tutal, this ride-sharing venture that he has started here, created 10,000 jobs. So more than Lok Seva Ayog, because in Nepal, Jagir means Lok Seva Jagir, right? So jobs aren't going to come from that sector. You look at the economic survey, I think last year, the latest data we have, 509 firms were registered, pledging to create about 26,500 jobs. So do the maths, 10,000 from the public sector, 26,000 from the private sector, 500,000 coming into the labor force. Just do the maths, right? Let's assume 200,000 are self-employed or underemployed in self-created businesses or in the agriculture sector. So there's a massive gap, right? And these social protection programs are not the answer. They are necessary, but they are not sufficient. So I go back to the point that, and this is globally a stylized fact, 8 to 9 out of 10 jobs come from the private sector. So unless we get the economy growing at 8, 9, 10% per annum on a sustained basis, we're not going to create jobs in large numbers. And even after that, even the nature of growth will need to be probed. Is it coming from automation? Is it coming from the highly specialized services sectors? Or is it being driven from sectors or driven by sectors which are growth, sort of labor, which use labor in large quantities. And their economists use this concept called, what is the employment elasticity of growth? For every 1% of growth, what percentage of employment creation are we making? And there, I think Nepal is reasonably placed in the sense that our long-term advantages will come from sectors like agriculture, commercial but higher productive agriculture, tourism, niche manufacturing, which has the potential to create jobs, modern tradable services, infrastructure. There's a massive gap in infrastructure that we need to fill over the next 15, 20 years. All of these sectors, if done right, with the right set of incentives in place, can create jobs in large numbers. So from that perspective, we're better placed than other countries, which are having to rely on job creating modes that may not actually be much more very friendly to job creation going forward, given the kind of disruption that we anticipate in many of these traditional sectors.
Thank you, Dr. Wagle. We know that there will be a lot of dynamism in the Nepali economy in the years to come. I want to come back to Songshao and talk about, again, sustainable development in a time of climate change. A recent Yale study told us a third of the ice in the Himalayas will melt by 2100. What I want to ask Songshao is, how can the state work with communities to resolve this issue? Can the private sector do things to negate the challenges, a global challenge like climate change? How does a low-income country like Nepal do that?
Thanks for the question. And I think it's super important to talk about that because Nepal is prone to natural disasters. And as you mentioned, the glacier melt is a real issue. And personally, I've spent time in the Arctic and Antarctica and witnessed that the both poles, along with the Himalayas, are the most heavily affected by climate change. And there are some estimates that by 2030, the temperature increase in Nepal could vary between 0.5 degrees, which is the best case scenario, to 2 degrees, which is more than the global average. And all of the disasters that might happen around this region have a real impact on human beings and local livelihood. And the fact is that modeling these behaviors, modeling glacier lake outbursts, modeling earthquakes, modeling flooding and droughts and forest fires are really difficult. And partially because we don't have the database. We don't have the data, we don't know, we don't have enough collection points and monitoring stations. So simply some of the disasters like landslide or flooding could happen within minutes of us knowing or within hours of us knowing. So how do we respond to that? And for some of the slower natural hazards like droughts, that has a direct impact on food security, on whether the local communities can actually support themselves. And these are a little bit of a long-term process to model. So all of these things are inherently difficult processes. So the basic infrastructure to put in place by the government, by the state, of data, of monitoring, of early warning system has to happen. And the private sector play a big role in this. You have mentioned the advancement in telecommunication, in ICT. We have a panel on ICT later, and how do you actually combine these technology with state implemented measures to actually deal with the, natural hazards and deal with response. And I want to come back to the idea of resilience, like what does it mean to actually have a resilient community? And economic growth is very important, a diverse livelihood, and we all know in the villages, for a local household to survive, you cannot just only depend on one economic means. And that's just gonna happen in a lot of communities. They'll have to have agroforestry. They might work seasonally in tourism jobs, and they might have connections. They might get into niche production of certain goods. So all of these diversified means of production needs to happen. So I see there's definitely a big role from the state and the private sector, but also a lot of grassroots-led and bottom-up approaches. And actually, on my trips to Nepal, I've met quite a few young entrepreneurs who are in sustainable development who have really taken up measures in their own community to start agroforestry projects, to start community-based programs in tourism, or to integrate development across the board on different levels and involving different members of the community. And I think that really adds to the resilience. And along with what was mentioned before about Nepal being at the center, at the hub of economic activities of the sub-region, I think it could be a confluence. It is where great rivers originate from. It is where the glaciers and this great reserve of fresh water we have, but also diverse faith systems, diverse values, and to be able to have that diversity and hold that diversity is a crucial means of resilience that we can rely on in this uncertain future.
Thank you, Songchao. On that note, Dr. Wakle, I just want to ask you from your experience in government, do you think that our policymakers are sort of thinking along these lines of what Songchao mentioned, of community development, of bottom-up approach, of working with the private sector to negate these sort of challenges? What do you think?
On community-led initiatives, actually, Nepal has a lot to celebrate. We're actually a great example of, Eleanor Ostrom got a prize for researching, Nobel Prize for researching how community-led irrigation systems resolve disputes and serve the villages very well. Community forestry, community radios, these are all initiatives that we've talked about, and homegrown Nepali-led initiatives. So that can be scaled up and applied to new sectors, especially in the environmental arenas. Policymakers in government are generally very conservative and traditional, so there's a lag time before they catch up with what's going on around them. Having said that, again, like with the economic reforms that you started with, it just takes a few very open-minded and reform-oriented leaders and policymakers and bureaucrats often to lead the way. And even on environment, I think EC Mode is based here in Kathmandu. It's headquartered here in Kathmandu. The vice chairman of the National Planning Commission actually sits on the board. We take a very active interest in what they do. So the report that they issued 2 weeks ago, that confirming what many of us feared, that 1/3 of the ice will go away by 2100, even if we cap average global temperatures to about 1.5 degrees Celsius to pre-industrial levels, under the assumption that the Himalayas, the higher altitudes actually warm even faster, right? So there's actually a more scary prediction of almost 2/3 of the ice disappearing by 2100. That's going to have a lot of impact on the big dream that we're building around hydroelectricity generation, the big dream that we're building around an agricultural, a green revolution that we've never had, but with Behri Babai and Sikta and Rani Zamaria, all this big irrigation coming, being built, and the leapfrogging that we'll make in agriculture. Tourism, the big dream that we're building around tourism, all have implications. So I think the sooner that we internalize some of these existential problems that are in our midst. But I think I'm quite optimistic that faced with a crisis, Nepalis do tend to, but we do, with federalism, there's also a greater space that's now been given to homegrown, community-led, very local initiatives. But some of these big problems need a macro solution at the central, at the national level, the regional level. The problem of black carbon, for example, needs absolute cooperation with our South Asian neighbors, most notably India. Many of the minor issues can be solved locally, as our constitution envisions.
Thank you, Dr. Wagle. I'll open the floor to questions. We have 3 questions. 2 of them are similar. I'll begin with Srijan Bhandari's question. He asks, capital formation is low in Nepal. Many of the countries are seen to be developed when manufacturing sector helps into export products and services. Our main export is human resources, and sooner or later they will return to Nepal, which eventually means the unemployment has not reduced but transferred to other countries. How can we absorb such people, generate capital, and improve productivity? I think, Dr. Song, would you like to take this question? How do you improve capital investment in Nepal?
I think you need to mobilize the domestic resources, but more importantly, actually, Dr. Waga has already mentioned, you need to have economic freedom. You have to empower people. I think we have several sessions about this. So the private sector, and for Nepal, it's even more important. At this stage of development, the market is not so prevalent, and you need to create markets for many sectors, and to let the private sector to work, and let people to work themselves out. What are the comparative advantages? Comparative advantages actually come from a free market. Without a free market, people cannot find where is profitable and where the comparative advantage of Nepal has. And Nepal has a very huge endowment of environment. And I think Soncha has already mentioned that this environment and the climate change issues are very real, and Nepal needs to protect this environment. Then probably environment, natural resources will become a huge endowment and in the future. And then I think you probably also need to think some big ideas. Say, many countries already proposed no fossil fuel vehicles by 2030. For Nepal, you have such endowment of natural resources. Environment is your key resources. And do you have this idea of no fossil fuel vehicles even before many countries by 2025? Or how about zero carbon emissions by a certain stage? Because Nepal has to think about all these issues. Then I think private investment, private investors would be utilized. As long as they have the freedom of the economic freedom as the open market, then probably they will find their niche to invest, to make money, and to prosper.
Thank you, Dr. Song. We have 2 similar questions to Dr. Wagle. Sandeep Babu Paudel asks, what are the bottlenecks in government in implementation of set policies? While Naresh Mishra asks, how receptive is the government for projects aligning with achievement of, I believe, MDG goals? So I think both of them want to ask, how receptive is the government towards achieving MDG goals? Are there any bottlenecks in achieving these policies?
You probably meant SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. On the MDGs, again, we've done reasonably well, partly because the goals were less ambitious, very basic in nature, and we started from a very low base. So Nepal was able to meet almost all of the MDGs. Now, when we scaled from the MDGs to the SDGs, the level of ambition has grown. MDGs were largely a government-led effort. SDGs need the entire country to rally behind these goals. When I was the vice chairman of the Planning Commission, we brought out a roadmap for SDGs from 2016 to 2030. We estimated then that we would need about $18 billion, close to $18 billion per annum. But that figure is being revised upwards to about $22 billion per annum. Now, GDP of Nepal is close to $30 billion in current prices. The government spends at all levels, at all three tiers, about $14–15 billion. So where is that gap coming from? It has to come from the private sector, focusing on all those SDGs which are amenable to private sector engagement. Energy, water and sanitation, urbanization, transport goals, leaving the government to focus on the more basic indicators on health and education, on gender equity, on governance, institutional quality, environmental protection, and all that. So there's a nice division of labor, if it can be demarcated, engaging the private sector. The households will have to chip in a lot, and that is factored in our overall costing. The civil society groups, the NGOs, the non-state actors will have to chip in as well. But the bulk of the SDG costs will have to be borne by the government, close to 55% of the total bill. And there, I think, once the government leads the way and gives adequate space through the right incentives again to the private sector, I think many of these goals will be met. I'm hopeful, will not be as successful as the MDGs, but this is a different game. We will try to meet most of the SDGs. Now, the implementation bottlenecks, there are many. I mean, you open a daily newspaper, you see where the problems are. The intense politicization of everything at the cost of merit-based rewards that we have in the bureaucracy, corruption, rent-seeking, and this, by the way, both the private sector and the government are in this together. The unstable series of governments that we've had, not been able to really focus very meaningfully on a mature policy cycle. So a lot of the policy initiatives that have been announced over the last 15–20 years have had a very short span, very fickle, prone to whims, and prone to easy reversals. That doesn't do that doesn't translate into private promotion of private initiatives, private investments. So a lot of factors. I think we probably need an entirely different session to dissect the Nepali bureaucracy and all the implementation bottlenecks. But I did do a short report, I think a year ago, looking at the big 21 projects of national pride, so-called Rashtriya Gaurav Ka Ayojana, and we sort of distilled the implementation bottlenecks to about 4 or 5 issues at that time. First was clarity with the laws and what incentives that we give to these bigger projects on tax exemptions, foreign exchange, repatriation, and all those issues. Personnel, the frequency with which they were moved around, and there the political interference was key. The availability of construction materials, actually, and there the environmental development trade-off. We really need to resolve it, and there's a big debate going on around the Nisgad airport and any other major projects. But a lot of these big Rashtriya Gaurav Ka Ayojanas actually went through this issue. Big issue with contract management. We've just seen this with Melamchi that ADB funded. The Italian contractor was probably the third or the fourth to take on that task, and he ran away, literally ran away, right? And the monitoring and evaluation and this idea of really learning from our past mistakes to avoid those. So there's a whole series of issues that we can really dissect at a popular level, that is, and popularize it through newspapers in a way that laymen will understand, lay audience will understand. But also some of these issues actually lend to very rigorous academic probing as well.
Thank you, Dr. Wagle. With that, we'll end the session. I think one of the main takeaways for me is that by 2030, talking about middle income status is not enough. We've become politically stable, but that is only one of the grounds on which development can be achieved. We have to look at equality, we have to look at new opportunities, we have to look at new access and connectivity as well. We have to strengthen our public institutions, as Dr. Song has said. Change will be slow, but we have to remain optimistic. We cannot become too complacent. With that, I thank my panelists for a very invigorating discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much to our moderator and our panelists for that wonderful session on towards 2030. I think we are all very hopeful and we look forward to what 2030 might bring in, how 10 years down the line, how Nepal might grow. The next session is tourism, product to experience. In Nepal, for a very, very long time, I think we have been talking about tourism products. We have the Himalayas, the birthplace of Lord Buddha, the lakes and mountains, base camps, and the temples. But how do they make us feel? The future of Nepali tourism is not only going to be based on products, but on experiences. Visit Nepal 2020 is also on the theme of lifetime experiences. Tourism is one of the mainstay of Nepalese economy and is also a major source of foreign exchange and revenue into the country, and that is why we got an economist to moderate the panel here today. Mr. Chandan Sapkota is a senior fellow at the Nepal Economic Forum, and we would like to thank him very much for flying in from Japan to be here. So I'd like to request the moderator and all the panelists for this session to kindly join us on stage. I can see our panelists walking in, so I'd like to request all our panelists to take their seat on the stage. This session is tourism, product to experience. I've explained about the theme of this session, and once again, I would now like to remind all our guests that please do send in your questions through the app of Kantipur Conclave. We have 60 minutes on the clock, during which we will complete the panel discussion and the question and answers if there's anything from the audience side and from the viewers who are watching us live from YouTube. So now I'd like to request our moderator, Mr. Chandan Sapkota, to kindly carry forward with the session.
Hi, good morning. My name is Chandan Sapkota, and I'll be moderating this session. We have in here an amazing group of panelists representing a very broad spectrum. And we have Anil, who caters to the budget market, comes from Oyo Hotels. Big group, has international presence. And we have Shraddhaji from Nepal Tourism Board, doing a lot of work on branding. We have Vijay from Dwarikas, doing a lot of amazing work for high-end tourists, and then trying to be a kind of role model for that kind of sector. And then we have Monica, who is working on heritage, tourism-related heritage and cultural preservation stuff. How do we make it sustainable kind of stuff? So we can cover everything related to tourism. So we'll try to focus on certain things that are related to the national goal. So before that, let me give you a kind of perspective on how tourism is positioned in Nepal. Tourism sector is one of the sectors where we have competitive advantage. And it has the potential for, it is one of the sectors which has the potential to structurally transform the economy on two fronts. One, growth. The entire supply chains related to travel and tourism industry, for every $1 you spend, for every 1 rupee you spend in this sector, the return is more than 1 rupee. So that's called a multiplier effect in the tourism sector. And then if you look at the employment, for every 1 person employer, for every 1 visitor we have in this country, the employment multiplier is like times 5. So we have, the tourism sector is giving employment to almost 5 million people, and we have 1 million visitors. So if you can simply work out the maths. So tourism sector has potential for both as a multiplier for growth and employment, and crucial for growing at more than 8-9% for this country. And if you look at the trend of inbound visitors, it has been growing by almost 25% consecutively for 3 years now. And if you look at the month by month, there is no kind of off-season these days. It's kind of amazing in Nepal, you don't have an off-season market. And this mostly is attributed to the Chinese tourists and Indian tourists. If you look at compositions like 17% Indians and 13% Chinese, right? And in terms of spending, the amount of money that we are earning as a country from tourism sector is almost 2.2% of GDP. It's like $650 million US dollars. That's a quite amount of money. And the average length of stay is not that increasing. It's like 13 days. That's where we have to increase per visitor average number of stay in the country. And then if you look at the average daily spending, it's just like $40. So we'll be revolving around these questions and how to jack these things up. Right? And one of the other things about Nepalese tourism sector is the net receipts that the country receives from tourism sector is in negative. So that means more of our people are going outside for tourism activities and spending more outside than people coming and spending here. So there is a kind of imbalance in here. We need to think about it. So from this perspective, we will anchor today's discussion on two things. One, the country has a vision, a goal to have 2 million tourists by 2020. That's like 1 million more than in 2018. Now, given the scale of infrastructure we have, is it attainable, or is it in fact a good goal? Right? Shall we be focusing on more per capita spending and having the same kind of multiplier effect rather than focusing on 2 million tourists? And it has a whole slew of consequences for sustainability of tourism products in Nepal and these things. So we will be focusing on these things, and then the target market, what is the segment that we should be focusing on, and then the competitive services and infrastructure. With that, let me jump into the questions. Let me ask the first round of questions to our panelists. And I would like to ask, starting with Anil, what he is doing in his sector and what his experience is like. Can you, all of you, give a brief on that one, please?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I am Anil Goyal, Group Chief Technology and Product Officer at OYO. At OYO, we are on a mission of providing quality living spaces to everyone worldwide at an affordable price. We are a real estate and hospitality technology company that aims to improve real estate and hospitality experience through advanced technologies, and thus by reducing the cost of operations, improving the experience, and offer that quality, consistent, predictable, high-quality experience to guests at an affordable price. We started in India in 2003. Since then, we have grown to be the largest hospitality chain in India, among the top 5 hospitality chains in China, and one of the fastest growing hospitality chain across the world. I'm really excited to be here. This is actually my first visit to Nepal, so I'm looking forward to also learning from experts on the panel more about Nepal and share some of my experiences from the globe.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Shraddha Shrestha. I am working as the manager for brand promotion and corporate partnership in Nepal Tourism Board. My main job includes brand positioning of Nepal, and I'm also involved with the latest Visit Nepal 2020 campaign announced by the government. I've been with the tourism board since 14 years now, so I think I'm old enough to say that I've seen the worst and the best days of Nepalese tourism. And since I'm working in the brand development, I think I'll be sharing most of my experiences in the sessions which is to be followed. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Renee Vijay Shrestha Ainaus. I work with the Dwarikas Group. I'm the executive director at the Dwarikas Group. The Dwarikas Group, we are a family business. Was started by my grandfather. I'm now the 3rd generation in this family business. We are 100% Nepali brand, and we try to portray Nepal in a different light. We try to put Nepal on the map for upmarket tourism, creating unique experience, Nepali experiences that are perceived to be at par with the best. With the best experience worldwide. We try to bring out, we have two properties where we try to bring out one, a cultural and architectural experience, which is the one that we have in Kathmandu, the Dwarikas Hotel, and then we have our second property, which is a bit out of Kathmandu, which is focusing on the natural beauty of Nepal and the Himalayan lifestyle, with introducing the clients to the symbiosis of the Himalayan lifestyle between Hinduism and Buddhism.
Namaskar सबैजनालाई. मेरो नाम मोनिका हो. I am Swiss from nationality, but I was born and partly brought up in Nepal, so I have a strong connection to this country. My parents were mountain lovers, and they took us trekking. Like every school holiday, we would go trekking to one or other remote area, which at that time wasn't really known even. So I went to Everest Base Camp at the age of 8, the first time I was there, or we went to Jomsom when there was no road there and no one ever thought there would ever be a road. So I watched these spaces develop in partly positive ways, like the infrastructure coming up, hospitality coming up, people welcoming tourists, also initiatives of taking care of the waste, for instance, in Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee. But I also observed a lot of changes which were worrying me, like a road coming into Annapurna area. Like nowadays you would walk along a dusty road for a lot of the stretches. You see masses of tourists going up to Everest Base Camp, which sort of bring the area to the brink of its carrying capacity. So I always carried this concern of how these mountain spaces develop. And so now I'm back here, I'm an entrepreneur. I work with people here, with partners here in sustainably developing these areas, taking care of these areas so that they will be precious and unique and beautiful also in the long term. So this is, on one hand, we do infrastructure projects, so we build sustainable, holistic tourism infrastructure, but I also offer conscious trekking tours with a different kind of approach to trekking, which is more about experience than product.
Thank you all. So, by now you might have guessed the broad range of things we'll discuss it in here, and it will be very exciting. So let me start with the second set of questions. In Nepal, in abroad, there are 3 products in tourism. Abroad, there's Lumbini, there's mountains and trekking, and then you have cultural heritage. Right? So 3 products, basically. I mean, you can have a subset of these if you want, but that's where our focus is. And then we also want to have 2 million tourists. That's like double the amount we had in 2018. So my question to Anil is, because he's better positioned to answer this one, because of the amazing market segment that they have been able to cater to in Nepal and throughout the world. What is your view about Nepal having 2 million inbound visitors target, and can we achieve it? And anything that you want to share in terms of international experience on how to cater to, how to have that many visitors and how to successfully cater to them?
Sure. So being a company of Indian origin, Nepal is very special to our heart. The 2 countries share hundreds of years of bonding. We share 28 border points, probably more than any other countries in the world. We allow our residents to travel to each other without requiring passports or visas. That's a very unique relationship we enjoy. We started here in Nepal in May 2017. In last less than 2 years, we now have grown to over 2,000 rooms. These are all exclusive franchised rooms that we standardize through technology across 120 hotels across Kathmandu, Pokhara, and Kirtipur. The learnings from our global experience, today we operate in 8 countries. We operate in India, Nepal, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, UK, UAE, Philippines, so fairly large segment of were covered there. One of the common learning we have had is if you create right mix of right location, right quality, and right price, there is infinite demand you can create. So there is not a lack of living spaces, but there is a lack of quality living spaces, and that's where OYO comes in. We partner with small independent property owners, provide them end-to-end technology to standardize their experience, and then help them provide that consistency of experience to guests every single time at an affordable price. By doing that, the guest who was previously hesitant to come, not sure about what their experience would be, will they get the right quality accommodation, you end up creating them as a repeat guest. This has been our learning in India, this has been our learning in China, where in less than a year and a half, we have already grown to be 275,000 rooms in China. And these rooms are all running at a very high occupancy, 60, 70%. So coming to Visit Nepal 2020 mission, which is bringing 2 million tourists, doubling it in 2 years, I believe it's very achievable. Nepal offers this incredible mix of, as Chandan said, opportunity for tourists, opportunity for pilgrimage with Pashupatinath temple, for adventure seekers, for trekking. So there is incredible amount of stuff people can do here. If we provide them the right experience, that mission is very achievable, and we at OYO are looking forward to be partner in
Let me, before going to Shraddhaji, let me ask a question to Anil, top up on that. What kind of experience would you want to give to a visitor so that we can achieve that target? Or what exactly are you talking about experience on that front?
From OYO's perspective, we focus on providing quality living spaces. So we want to make sure every guest that's coming to Nepal will have a quality accommodation. They know what experience they are going to get. Our standard experience provides complimentary breakfast, free Wi-Fi, clean linen, predictable high quality toiletries and other amenities in the room. So by having that, guests can really focus on what they are here for experiences, whether it's trekking or mountaineering, whether they are here for pilgrimage, but not have to worry about the living spaces. So OYO will focus on providing that quality living space so guests can then spend their time on what they are here for.
Thank you, Anil. Now let me move to Shraddhaji, because he's working on Nepal Tourism Board for a long time, and has probably worked, we had 2 rounds of Visit Nepals previously, and we're going to have one more round, 1998, I think 2011, to 11, and then 2020. So how are you branding the tourism sector, your efforts in branding tourism sector, effectively branding, to achieve this 2 million target? How are you doing these things?
Since you've mentioned the other 2 campaigns which we've done earlier, I would like to go back to 1998 when it was, Visit Nepal 1998, where the theme was Nepal of its own. So that time, Nepal was just beginning the tourism sector, and we wanted to introduce Nepal to the whole world. And second came 2011 when we said Together for Tourism. That was the theme, Align for Together for Tourism. And that was very important because, we saw a relatively very bad season in the tourism industry. We had the insurgency and things like that. So we wanted to bring every people, every industry together for tourism. And now, after, let's say, a decade or more, we have come up with another campaign, national campaign, that's Visit Nepal 2020. And this was another important event because, we've gone through a massive disaster, the earthquake. And so after the earthquake in 2015, people thought, international community thought that Nepal was completely rampaged and there was nothing left. So we wanted to give a positive information that, okay, we are back in the business and we are all set to, welcome you in the country. So this is, again, a different branding for the campaign. And you just, when you were asking to Anilji about, you said that there were 3 products in Nepal: culture, and mountaineering, and you said something. Lumbini, yes. But I would like to differ from that because, Nepal has so much immense potentiality. For a person who has worked in the marketing department for like 14 years, been working in the branding, that's the difficulty we are finding, how to brand Nepal. Just one word which can explain everything in Nepal, right? So we came up with Naturally Nepal branding in 2007. So that time, the perspective was different. People thought about more destination activities and itineraries. But the paradigm has shifted so much over the decade now. The travel trend, the global tourism travel trend has shifted into more authentic experiences. They have like 4 different things. So first being, that specialization, second being the technology, third being the authenticity and the experiential travel. So specialization, people want to get, they want to get something unique of what they're paying for. And technology, we all know that, okay, now people are so into social media and so digitally connected that everybody wants, the packages in their palms, within their forehands. So the people in the tourism sector say that, after 5 years, maybe the travel agents and the tour operators are going to be obsolete. So that is the technology thing we're looking at. Number 3 is the authenticity. Now people do not go for, like the itineraries, but they seek very unique experiences they get from the place. And specialization is, our CEO always says that tourism is no more like sightseeing, it's more like sight feeling. So people today wants to live with the people and live the place.
Thank you for that. Now let me go to Vijay, and because he comes from a segment, a very interesting segment, and they've been the leading entrepreneurs in this sector for a long time. I'd like to get his views on how should Nepal position itself in the broader tourism market to either achieve the 2 million target, or if you want to increase per capita visitor spending. Right?
So I think it's a very important question, and there's always I think one has to define exactly what are the assets Nepal has to offer to this world. Yeah, as we always said, we have a natural beauty which is unique in this world. I think being a Nepali to say, I would say you cannot find this anywhere else. We have a cultural identity with this unique blend between Hinduism and Buddhism, which is also very unique. We have wildlife, and then we have the spiritual side, spiritual tourism to it. So there's tremendous potential. But from our perspective, we need to use that potential correctly. When you look at these products and you define the experience with these products, in our opinion, let's say, the mountain experience is an experience which you want to experience with very less people around you. It's an experience of solitude. You go to the mountains, you trek by yourself. You don't go to the mountains and walk with 100 people next to you. The same as with wildlife. When you go to wildlife, I think the experience you want to have is by yourself, or maybe with a couple, or maybe 4 or 5 people, but you don't want a traffic jam while looking for the tiger. So the question is our infrastructure ready to host 2 million people at this stage? Or is this actually going to diminish the experience which we have to offer today? As Chandan has said, if the numbers which was, I think, $40 per day, $40 per day spending, the same impact could be, let's increase that $40 to maybe $80. Let's increase it to $90 per day. We'll have the double amount of income. We'll have the same expenditure by increasing, because our tourism incoming numbers is about, I think, 940,000. So increasing it to 2 million would double the income. There's different ways to get more income, but I think it's very important. And Nepal at this stage is very lucky, yeah, because at this stage internationally, what I see, yeah, I mean, we cater more to the upmarket segment, so what I see from our clients, from the shows that I go to, the feedbacks that we receive, the luxury segment is moving towards this experience that Nepal has to offer. So for us, spirituality is becoming very, very big. These solitude experiences of mountains is becoming very, very big. Adventurous experiences becoming very, very big. But we need to be able to cater to that experience. So when we call the people here, we have the 2 million people at our doorstep. Are we able to give them an experience where they're going to go home and they're going to say, wow, I'm going to come back to Nepal for my next experience? That's the question one needs to answer. And how do we portray these experiences? To make an experience is not very easy. We try to give very different experiences everywhere we go. And for us, even to do that, it takes a long time to be ready to welcome a guest to our establishment, to being able to satisfy a guest and make him go home and say, yeah, I paid $500 a night, but this is more than worth it. So my aspect would be maybe focus more on the asset and brand that asset in a different kind of way. Also, there's so much untapped potential. Chananji was talking about Lumbini. I don't think Lumbini would be ready today to host 2 million tourists from the infrastructural development. There is other places like Janapur, the birthplace or the home of Sita, the birthplace where Ram and Sita met. There's tremendous potential to develop new products in Nepal. But I think we first need to develop the experiences and then call the people. Because we should have the people go home and say, you know, Nepal once is not enough. At this stage, I think we have 4 products which are ready, which would be Kathmandu, Chitwan, Pokhara with the Annapurna, and Everest. That is the main, attractions where people go to. Is that ready to cater to 2 million tourists? At this stage, I don't know. But if we have, let's say, 10, 12 products where we can disperse the tourists to, I would happily say, yeah, 2 million tourists is a great target. But at this stage, I would say, let's develop our experiences, let's increase the per capita spending, and then let's go for the next step.
Thank you. So, as I said before, see, we have a very broad range of panelists in here coming from different perspectives. I'll come back to this one to nudge you a little bit on this one. But before that, let me go to Monica and ask her a question about her views on this 2 million target and its implications on preservation of natural and cultural heritages in Nepal. Now, how do we make it sustainable? Please.
Thank you. Is it okay? Is it on? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chandan. Well, to be very honest, this 2 million figure, it scares me because as also Vijay said, I'd like to follow up on that. I don't see Nepal to be ready to accommodate 2 million tourists in a sustainable way. Maybe you could sort of spread them in the existing infrastructure. I don't know about those numbers. But what to me is much more important than looking into the growth of tourism at the moment is to looking into the quality of infrastructure and quality of service we can offer, and quality also in terms of how we take care or how it is being taken care here in these tourist destinations. Because this unique asset Nepal has to offer in terms of natural beauty and cultural heritage, it has to be taken care of in the long term. Otherwise, these 2 million people will come running around these areas, and eventually this tremendous potential will get lost to a spread of infrastructure, to uncareful development in these areas. So there's various ways you can do that. So for one, as I've mentioned, there's the infrastructure, the tourism infrastructure. So for instance, in Chitwan, we are looking into a way of building homestay tourism in a holistic way, where you look at all the components linked to that particular accommodation. So you look at where does the energy come from? Is it renewable energy? You look at where's the water coming from? Where's the wastewater going? What happens with the waste? Can it be reused, recycled? Can it be avoided? Because eventually 2 million people will bring a lot of waste in whatever way, and this has to be taken care of. Otherwise, it'll accumulate, and 2 or 3 years later, people won't want to come if there's a huge rubbish pile behind the house. So that's one thing I'm looking into, or I'm encouraging Nepal to think about if it's about developing tourism in terms of numbers. And for me, I also very much agree on Vijay's comment on, let's think about, maybe it's more about heightening the revenue per capita, because if you have a good service, if you have a good quality, if you have this tremendous asset you can offer to the people, that has a value, and the value has a price. And if you have a good quality service, if you have a holistic accommodation, people will enjoy more and they will be ready to pay that price because it has a value. So I think that's very important to think about.
Thank you, Monica. Picking on this thing about this value and things, because these, if people are happy with the services and the upkeep of the natural heritages or what they came for to see, and they are satisfied with, then you will have repeat visitors, right? So, and from what I know, Dwarika has been incredibly successful in terms of these repeat visitors. So what kind of experience, I mean, are they looking for, or I mean, how do you ensure that somebody who has come to Nepal would still want to come to Nepal after a few years?
I think it's very important to firstly understand, and that's what we do when we market ourselves. We don't sell the Dwarikas first. We first sell Nepal, because I need to convince my client to come to Nepal. He needs to choose between Japan, Cambodia, Laos, or Nepal. So I need to convince him first to come to Nepal. So I need to first sell him, okay, you can do these things in Nepal. And then when he's come here, okay, now I can sell you Dwarikas. Now I can tell you, okay, this is an accommodation where you can stay. But he comes to see Nepal. So first I need to convince him about the country. So that's why it's so important that there's a conclusive experience, where we focus on, building up an experience that is long-term beneficial to the tourists, where the tourists go back. And of course, for us, the retention of clients is very important. So whatever we do 100%. For us, quality, attention to detail, and attention to each aspect of the experience. Once you enter Dwarikas, till the moment you leave Dwarikas, you need to focus on each detail. It's from the welcome, it's from the way the bed is made, from the way you serve the good night chocolate, from the way the food is served, from the attitude of the staff, from what kind of background music is played in the lobby. Everything needs to be conclusive. It has to be a conclusive experience. It has to go one direction. There's one goal, and that's what we move towards. And every single thing needs to be according to that goal. And that's what I would wish also for Nepal, because we have that potential. If we wouldn't have the potential, okay, but we have that potential. And honestly, till now, I think it's still mostly untapped. So we have the potential to move this. I don't say everybody needs to do high-end tourists. That's not what I want to say. There needs to be all range of tourists coming to Nepal, but it should be still, even though it's different budgets, it should still be a conclusive experience. We still focus on the same way. We still should focus on what makes Nepal unique in this world, because we have a possibility to brand Nepal. And that doesn't mean I need to brand it as a $500 destination or as a $40 destination. I'm talking about I can give a Nepali, local, authentic experience that people can enjoy and where they get quality for whatever money they pay. That's what I want to do. It doesn't mean it's only what we do. It can be another side, but it has to be a conclusive experience. You can have an authentic local experience for $50. You can have an authentic local experience for $500. Doesn't matter, right? As long as the client gets, okay, Nepal stands for this type of tourism, and the beauty of this is exactly what Nepal could stand for is what people are looking for today.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. When you have value for money, then when you realize there is value for your money, from the services being provided, there is a tendency that you tend to visit that place again because you feel comfortable, it's cozy for you. So I want to move to Anil on this one. So because you are like a mass market in here, you came in and make a splash, and then catering to a really good segment of the tourism market. And I would be interested to know what you are doing, what you experience with repeat tourism, repeat visitors, and if there is more potential for it, because per capita spending tends to be higher on repeat visitors because they feel comfortable coming, plus they see value for money in it, right? So we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, first of all, I agree with Rani and Monica that you need to make sure everybody who is coming have the right experience. They experience the unique Nepal product they are here for. That said, at OYO, we are a much more optimistic company, and we believe 2 million mission is very doable. Coming back to our own experience, we are less than 6-year-old company that started in 2013. If you would have asked anyone at that time, nobody would have believed that we can get to 450,000 rooms in less than 6 years. We entered Nepal less than 2 years ago and already operating 2,000 rooms here. So we believe if you focus on standardization, you can provide guests a great quality experience that they expect, and you deliver it every single time, and it can be done at the mass scale. Of course, there is a great room for unique experiences that a niche segment of travelers expect. And it's probably not 2 million niche travelers that will be coming to Nepal, but we do believe there can be travelers who are coming here for pilgrimage, travelers who are coming for mountaineering, trekking, and other experiences, that they can get a good quality experience at an affordable price. And more people experience Nepal, they would become brand ambassador for Nepal, which will then in turn bring more repeat tourism every year. And it's a cycle which will automatically bring in more investment in infrastructure. So we see this as a positive cycle that you bring in more customers, they experience it, they bring your ambassador, that brings more investment, which brings more customer, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. So we do believe both the experience can be maintained and that kind of scale can be achieved. And we are definitely excited to bring our expertise here in doing that, which we have also shown by running 2,000 rooms consistently here with great quality experience.
Thank you, Anil. Now, we are so far, when we talk about tourism industry, we always tend to focus on international tourism. There are domestic tourists as well, as equally good segment and with a very high per capita spending comparatively. As I said before, when I was giving a brief introduction of tourism sector, more Nepalese, the amount of money Nepalese are spending outside for travel and tourism activities is actually higher than what inbound tourists are spending. There is a disconnect now. We're trying to promote tourism sector, but more of our people are spending money outside. More money outside. So if you look at the balance of payments, it's a transaction of our country with the rest of the world, the net receipts is like negative, right? So we are not earning the kind of foreign exchange reserves we should be earning. So from that perspective, when we talk about tourism sector, are we neglecting the domestic tourists? So my question to pretty much all of the panelists in here is domestic tourism important? And what exactly do you think should be done to bring this to the fore, like we talk about international tourists to Nepal? Right? Please, starting with Shraddhaji.
I think domestic tourism really plays a big role in the tourism sector of Nepal. That was much realized, after the earthquake, I would say, because that time I was in Pokhara. So, there used to be off seasons and high seasons back then, but the inflow of the domestic tourists have, somewhat, there's nothing called, off season right now. So the influx of domestic tourism is so much. So destinations like Muktinath and Jomsom and Rara, these have become very much popular by the domestic tourism. That's why, considering the importance of the domestic tourism, even Nepal Tourism Board has given a very significant priority to the domestic sector. And we had this Gumpir Barsa, which was dedicated especially for the domestic tourist. And right now also when we communicate the marketing strategy, when you communicate the positioning of the brand, we are doing a lot in the domestic market. Talking about branding, we have started the provincial branding, which we thought could bring a lot in the domestic tourism. We've started doing the provincial branding with the states who has names. So we have done a bit of exercise with the Gandhi province. First, we've done an initial workshop, and even the people have realized, the importance of it. Before, I myself have, witnessed the negativeness. I would like to say the negativeness of the trade towards the domestic tourists before. They thought maybe the white skins are more important than the Nepali tourist, and we've been, put into that matter. So, but now they've realized that domestic tourists are also the goose who lays the golden eggs. So the priority has been transferred. So now if you go to places like Jomsom and Everest Base Camp or Annapurna areas, they would prefer a Nepali customer to a client from the third country, because the expenditure a Nepali family does is more. So this is very important, the domestic tourism aspect, and Nepal Tourism Board is doing a lot to promote the domestic tourism.
Thank you, Shraddha. Let me come to Monica on picking up that point. What role do you see of the subnational governments? When we subnational governments, we say local bodies. We have 753 local bodies in this country, and if each local body can have a unique piece to promote tourism in that sector, be it a park, be it a water, boating, or be it some cultural heritage site, temples, and all these things. So what is your perspective on local bodies promoting these products, these tourism products that they have, in a more sustainable way? How can they do it? What do you think about it?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that the local bodies take care of their touristic assets and the touristic service or offers they have, because they ultimately know the uniqueness of their particular place, and they can build on that. And eventually they're the caretakers of that area, and they live there, they've been living there for ages, they have their culture, so it's up to them to develop their particular space. And as I mentioned before, I think it's very important to look into all of the components linked to tourism. So starting from how do they come there, what's the mode of transportation, do they come by road, do they come by air, how can we ensure that coming there is already an experience, and is an experience which is positive for the visitor. Then we have the whole resource question, like where do the resources come from, where does the water come from, where does the waste go? And in my opinion, also very, very important is how can we anchor that experience in the local setting? Because people, as we've heard now from various of my colleagues here, it's really about experiencing the uniqueness. So, and uniqueness is anchored in the local setting. So this village or this municipality or this region, what's particular there, and people want to come and experience that lifestyle. So if you, for instance, if we go to Chitwan or the region of the Terai, what is specific there? Like what's specific in this village? Maybe, and then maybe the accommodation can be built in that style, and that doesn't have to be a Dwarika's high segment. That can also be very, I'd say, simply built. Yeah, you use local materials. You include the local people build that based on traditional architecture, because that's ultimately the experience. We don't want to stay in. Talking now from my own experience as a traveler, I don't want to stay in a standard concrete place. If I come to a beautiful traditional village, I want to stay in those houses. I want to feel, what does it feel like to live in these thatched roof places? It looks so comfortable, it looks so cozy. I want to experience that, sit at the fireplace in the evening, see how the food is being cooked on the fire. That's like, wow. We have electric cooking stoves. We don't remember what it's like to cook on the fire. So all these specific, and I guess for the local population, it's like, oh, this is this is our poor lifestyle, we want to offer the tourists something better. But actually, the tourists want to experience particularly that lifestyle, which has a value. It's rooted in your local setting. So yeah, and one very beautiful example for me is also like the food we eat when we come to that place. We see rice fields everywhere, we see vegetables we see all these products being cultivated in that land, and we want to try that. We want to try the rice of that particular place. We don't want to have cheap rice imported from somewhere just because it's cheaper. And there again, we come to the issue of value for price, quality. That's the point, yeah.
Thank you, Monica. Now, let me so when we, as you heard from the panel, some are very optimistic that 2 million tourists, we can increase more number of visitors in this country, but then some are worrying about the carrying capacity and whether we should be targeting the high-end segment or upper middle high segment. So are we, this is the question to Vijay and Anil, starting with Anil. Are we heading in a situation, given the state of infrastructure we have and the ambition in terms of bringing in the number of visitors, are we heading the Malthusian way? In economics, you have this Malthusian theory where population grows so high and you run out of capacity and it crashes, and then you go to the sustainable level again. So are we actually in the tourism sector heading in that way when we target too many visitors without looking at the carrying capacity in terms of infrastructure, the entire supply chain is related to this one, right? From procuring vegetables that you use in your hotels to the human resources that you have, the trainings that need to be given, and all these. So after we bring in too many tourists, then they realize the services are shoddy or not to their expectation, and then they start dropping down, and then we think about the high-end kind of increasing per capita visitor spending. So what's your view on this one?
Yeah, so slightly limited exposure to Nepal, but I'll draw on partly my experience from India as well as partly what I just learned here from Chandan. If there is imbalance of Nepalese tourists going out and spending more than the tourists coming in, there is a large opportunity to promote domestic tourism. And that can help achieve that target without stressing the infrastructure as much, because those tourists, their expectations are a little bit different. Some of the aspects that others come to experience here, they are more used to it. Also, drawing from experience from India, until a few years ago, tourism was really meant for privileged top 5%, and that's why you relied much more heavily on foreign tourists than even local tourists. But what companies like OYO have done is democratized it further, where now more and more middle class is able to experience that. So, and when a middle class traveler is traveling, their expectation, their demands are not as high. They're not gonna go spend as much money, that's understood. They're not gonna demand as many facilities while they still expect a good experience. So having a balance of both high-end experiences, which do put more strain on infrastructure. You do have to develop infrastructure even for the middle-class experience, but mixing those two together, I think you can achieve it without reaching that tipping point where the experience takes a significant hit.
Thank you. This is an optimistic view. So let me go to Shraddhaji. What's your view on this one?
Well, the 2 million target was not just put there. Our tourism industry is like industry is mature enough to set a target like that, which is backed by research, of course. And you're talking about the existing infrastructure, and I would say like with Nepal Tourism Board recently did a hotel survey, and the output was, we could cater 2.5 million tourists with the existing hotel capacity. When I say like hotel capacity, we say, it involves the non-tourist hotels to the star categories, but doesn't involve, again, the community stays, Airbnbs, and the homestays. So in that accommodation part, we are right? And other things like amenities, we also talk about amenities, right? So what tourists will do after they come to Nepal. So activities-wise also we are quite done. And the Ministry of Tourism has identified 100 new destinations for the VNY, the Visit Nepal 2020 campaign. And for the 2020, we will be, announcing 20 mature destinations which we are promoting. So these destinations will be an alternative to destinations which are quite packed right now. So maybe an alternative trekking trail to the EBC or the ABC, and other sectors like we'll be involving and adopting more community sectors for this thing. Another thing is the capacity. You talked about the capacity building, and Nepal has this 50 years of rich experience in the training sector. So we are also working towards developing training 2,000 skilled laborers, skilled manpower in the tourism industry. The bottleneck, what we are facing is the infrastructure, both being aviation and the surface transport right now. But the Nepal government, saying that Nepal government and the Ministry of Tourism has taken this in priority, and I would like to say that there's another second international airport coming up in Lumbini. That's the Siddhartha Gautam International Airport, which is scheduled to operate from 2019 September. And also we are doing a massive rehab of the Trivandrum International Airport. So it will be starting from early April and be going to July. So after the rehab, we are expecting that the international airport will be operational for 24 hours. So that's another, we'll have added flights from there, and which might decrease the congestion which we are facing right now. Talking about the surface transport, the government has again, put some roads into high priority. That includes the Bhaktapur Nagarkot road and the Kalanki Nobise road. So we are working on that, we are realizing it, and in the same time we are also working with the provincial government so that they could invest a lot in the infrastructure which could for the upcoming years.
Thank you, Shraddhaji. When I was looking at Vijay, he was very curiously listening to these viewpoints. I'm pretty sure you have something to say on this one, and Monica too, briefly, because I want to take some questions from the Twitter. Some people have been asking some questions. So briefly, please.
Yeah. So well, I really can't comment because we are a very small company. We have two properties. We cater to high-end tourism. We have a total of 124 rooms to sell per day, so that's not a lot. Yeah, so I can only speak from my experience, because we are known in the international market for upmarket Nepal tourism, and it's always the same questions that come to come to Nepal. Yeah, our clients, they want to come to Nepal. They see Nepal as a very beautiful country, and Nepal has a lot of goodwill abroad. The questions that come is, do we have the right infrastructure to cater to these people? Being flights, being roads, also, besides doing Annapurna and Everest and Chitwan, is there any new products coming up? So I'm always getting these questions with the facilities that are required for this type of tourism. So I think there is still potential to grow, because our average client stays about, you said 13 days, our average client from our perspective, what we cater to in the hotel stays about, maybe 5 nights in Nepal. So mostly it's used as a combination tour. So a lot of people, they combine our travel with Kathmandu, Bhutan, come back to Kathmandu, fly off. We have a lot of extension programs to India that we cater to. And I think that is not required. I think, these companies, they sell worldwide around. They bring really high value clientele, and also these people, they respect the culture, they respect nature, they want to they want to experience this. But we get the same answer saying, Nepal program, Nepal is not ready till now for our clients. So we're doing an extension, we're doing a combination with Bhutan, because they feel that we're not ready. Now, we need to give that assurance. We need to be able to tell them, we are ready here, look at this, go here, experience this, come back, stay, not only 4 nights, let's make it 7, let's make it 8, let's make it 9. And these guys, they do spend a lot of money in this country, and they are happy spending this because that's what they're looking for. So I think infrastructure-wise, I agree disagree a little bit. I think we are, from our perspective, not 100% ready. We still need to develop that. That needs to be a focus. There needs to be an incentive system. There needs to be a framework that pushes people also to cater towards these kind of experiences. And I said it doesn't have to be always high-end. These people also will stay in a decent experience for $100 or $50. They don't mind, but they want an authentic, quality, local experience. And waste is a big issue. Natural footprint is a big issue. So they're all concerned about these things. So we need to assure them, when you come here, you get that solitude experience in the mountains, you get the real wildlife experience without having, traffic jams in the thing. That's what we need to assure them. And they will come, that I can guarantee, because they're looking for. But from their perspective, Nepal today is not ready. That's only what I can give as a feedback, but I cannot comment if it's a realistic goal or not.
Monica, please.
Thank you. Yeah, there's one particular issue which is very much concerning me. Also, having observed the developments in the last decades here, and that's related to infrastructure, road infrastructure. I'm aware it's a very sensitive issue, and I don't have a solution, but I just observe what's happening, or what has happened in, for example, Annapurna region, what's also happening in the Upper Mustang. There's road connection coming up, which is as such positive. It brings economic development, it brings mobility, it brings access, but it also destroys a lot of the landscape quality. And this is just an encouragement to choose or decide wisely where to build roads and where to keep the area in a, let's say, more pristine state, because particularly experiences like you mentioned, Vijay, the solitude experience, the wildlife experience, this natural beauty experience, there's a loss of that if you have a road. You gain a lot if you have a road, but you lose a lot. And this has to be a very conscious decision, which I believe should be taken by the local bodies, but in a very informed and very conscious way, not thinking quickly, oh yeah, let's have a road, let's build infrastructure, that's going to be a popular decision, people will be happy. But it's going to destroy a lot, which is not easy to repair, because once there's a road, there's a scar in the landscape. And imagine the Khumbu area having a highway up to Everest Base Camp. You lose those thousands of visitors who want to trek up there and have that experience of actually reaching that high altitude, beautiful place on their own sort of personal force. Yeah. So to me, that's one of the very, very important issues that Nepal has to think about and decide about wisely, and in partnership with whoever is concerned in taking these decisions.
A very interesting point. Now, these kind of natural cultural heritages are something like, once you lose it, you can't have them back. It takes like generations to recover those things. So it's a very sensitive matter. Sustainability should be a very important part of these things, right? So with that, we have around 7 minutes left. So probably 2 minutes each to our speakers on this very interesting question I got on Twitter. So let me read it out. One of the, I've got so many things on Twitter, I can only take one question, so it's kind of representative questions. This guy is asking, put yourself in a tourist's shoes. Where would you spend your money while in Nepal? Food, activities, entertainment, souvenirs? Isn't it same limited stuff wherever you go? There ain't enough choices. So I'd like your comment on this one, please.
Sure. I don't think it's one answer for everyone. Of course, different folks have different expectations. I think one of the key reasons folks come to Nepal is definitely for the unique experience mountainous terrain, Himalayas provide. So that definitely, I think, will be high on my list if I was coming to Nepal to spend time on experiencing outdoors, experiencing adventure activities. But that said, you can only enjoy it when you have a good quality accommodation you are living at. You have good food that you enjoy. If you're out there only for a day, you can probably get by with whatever you get to eat. But if you are there to experience for a week or more, you do need quality food. So it's not either or. I think people come here to experience Nepal's natural beauty, but all of the other things will have to be up to the speed at the same time.
Well, we've heard that people said that I come to Nepal for the mountains, but I will come back for the people. So the people, the Nepalese themselves has become a major product of Nepal these days. So I think if I were a tourist, and if I've heard that, I would love to be with the Nepali people, love to see what they are doing, what activities they're doing, and sharing my life. And like Nepal Tourism Board, we are trying to create this lifetime experience, give you one lifetime experience that could change your life, right? So we call it the hero experience. So I would maybe live with a community and try to get that. What is exactly that I'm missing in my country that I would gain from Nepal, or I can learn from the Nepalese people? I think that would be my take.
Yeah, the question is quite interesting. Very negative outlook. I don't see it that negative. I think if you come to Nepal, there's so much experience you can have today to broaden your horizon in the international context. Getting to know the deeper meaning of the Nepalese culture is one aspect where I would, when I would travel to Nepal, be interested in. Of course, natural beauty, so going remote somewhere, seeing the mountains, experiencing the solitude of the mountains, and then of course hunting for the tiger, seeing the tiger. But I think you need to spend your money everywhere. It's a food experience, it's a stay experience, it's an experience that's going to the sites. So you need to divide your money into each of the segments that gentleman was talking about.
Yeah, I believe this comment is targeted towards the question of uniqueness we've been discussing before. Nepal has, I don't know how many different ethnicities living in this area, and every ethnicity has their own food, their own architecture, their own products, their own culture, their own handicrafts. And I would just like to encourage all of these communities, all of these ethnicities to build on that uniqueness and to be proud of that uniqueness and to consciously work on that and offer that particular experience to the visitors. So I think food is one very, very interesting part of that. People come here and they say, oh, it's dal bhat everywhere. But dal bhat has so many different ways of cooking, so many different varieties of all these different tarkari, all these different achar, all these different... And I think there's even much, much more local food varieties available, but people lose them because everyone cooks dal bhat, or in the trekking areas, everyone has the standard menu of whatever they think the tourists want, but maybe the tourists want to experience the local food, which is very, very unique and you don't get anywhere else in the world, and maybe not even in the neighboring valley. So that's, I think, what is also being asked for in this comment.
Thank you. We have almost like 3 minutes left. Kind of very interesting point. It's, this question raises an issue about people's awareness of what's available in Nepal. People really don't know of these things. Limited to mountains, Lumbini, Pashupati, and these things. So many like ethnic varieties, local level promoting their own products. It's like culture of different ethnicity, not only food, like different cultures. So many things that you can experience, and that becomes a lifetime experience and gaining of something, right? So this is what countries like Japan have been doing, like local bodies. Like every local body, every city has a unique feature. Be it a small, cupcake with Pokemon on it, people would travel to that area and buy that one. And the aura around branding that thing. That's amazing. So let me ask a final round of questions very quickly, please. How can we leverage technology to create a good tourism product and an experience? Starting with Anil.
This is, of course, a key 4-day for us. Everything from how do you make sure all the things you promise, they are delivered 100% of the time. So technology can come from monitoring the systems to predicting demand to making sure right quality of accommodation is provided to each guest based on their unique needs.
Everyone was talking about lifetime experiences, and they were saying like we have to make lifetime experiences. We have to come up with different experiences to cater the tourist. So I just want to say like, yes, we are doing that. The whole Visit Nepal 2020 campaign is focused on lifetime experiences. So now Nepal Tourism Board is working with names like TripAdvisor and Lonely Planet and Nat Geos. So we want to create 20 best experiences of Nepal. So we want them to create it, not just Tourism Board giving a random experience just like that, but we want the experience to come from the user-generated content. So we are doing it So in a while you'll be getting it, and as I said, that the travel operators and the trekking operators will be obsolete in some years. So we have to literally focus more on the digital platforms. So technology, I think, has a major role to promote Nepal tourism.
Yeah. So technology, as Anil said, in the hotel context, is used for standardizing a product, right? So for us, it's not that important because our products are not standardized. It's exactly the opposite. We try not to give the same experience in the other place. So it's two completely different experiences. We always try to highlight, okay, what we think is special about Kathmandu. Okay, it's architecture, culture, art, Dhulikhel, Himalayas, natural beauty, and the Himalayan lifestyle. So two different, very different approaches, so we don't need that standardization so much. So technology is not so much important as it would be for Anil. But it shows also that you can do business. I mean, they're very successful. We are also not that unsuccessful. So you can, look at different aspects from all where you can start businesses in a different way, and there's space for everyone in this market.
I'm sorry, we have to quickly 30 seconds on this one.
Yeah, I have a quick one. Just don't forget the value of digital detox. Areas where there's no access, it's such a good break, such a good potential.
Yeah, thank you. I have to break it up because time's up. There are like two messages we got out of this, and I'm kind of optimistic in a way. So 2 million target is possible, and we saw it, but it's also possible that we can increase per capita visitor spending with the right kind of product and experience we give it to them. Plus, with these two, we can have it a sustainable, we can do these in a very sustainable way. So that, I think, is a takeaway of this thing. I'm very optimistic about tourism sector in Nepal. It's a very competitive, we have competitive and competitive advantage on it. So with that, thank you very much for listening. Thank you to the panelists for such an amazing discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Mr. Chandan Sapkota for moderating this session on tourism, product to experience. Thank you to all our panelists as well for this wonderful session. Nepal definitely has a huge potential when it comes to tourism, and those potential needs to be unleashed, of course, keeping in mind the sustainability factor of it. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for this panel and for this session. We now have a tea break for 10 minutes, but I'd also highly encourage all of you to definitely download the app of Kantipur Conclave, because the questions for the next sessions will also be taken through that. You'll also be able to get info on the speakers and the next sessions that are coming up. So break for 10 minutes, and then we'll be back with our third session, which is Where is the Money?
I have a dream. मेरो सपनाको नेपाल हुनेछ. We have overcome. We have overcome much to arrive at today. We have survived. We have survived years and years of feudal rule, an absolute monarchy, a rudderless democracy, a horrific civil war. We have survived a crippling earthquake and a paralyzing blockade. We have survived these vicissitudes because we are a resilient people. But mere hardiness is not the sum of our character. We have always known that there would come a time when we as a people would achieve our full potential. That time is now, and we must heed its call.
The call of the fierce urgency.
Call of the fierce urgency. The fierce urgency of now. NIC Asia presents the Kantipur Conclave, connected by Encel, powered by Asian Paints. Mero Sapanaku Nepal, Hunitsa.
An early stage venture capital fund in India.
Okay, so why do you think necessary?
See, it's my first time in Nepal, and it's a pleasure and honor being here for the Kantipur Conclave. And as the tagline suggests, it's called Unleashing Nepal's Potential. I think it's quite interesting to see such a collection of diverse experiences and skills and people with those kind of skill sets come together to think about the ways to unleash Nepal's potential, especially as a young nation with a young population. There's a lot that can be achieved, and for me personally, this visit to Nepal, my first visit to Nepal, has been eye-opening about the kind of depths this country has, the places the economy can go, and that's all possible because of this conclave. It got me here, so I think that's important, to bring together a diverse set of people to ideate on the future of a country. It's a very interesting and very important step.
Do you have anything specific to say about Kantipur Conclave?
My contribution here is about the financial part of the summit. The session is called Where's the Money? That's obviously, as the name suggests, it's about sourcing capital and what an economy and a set of people can do to source capital from different parts of the world. And I'm looking forward to that. I've got very esteemed co-panelists, and it's going to be very interesting.
Sure. And what are your expectations from this event?
As I said earlier, it's about listening to the ideas that all these people bring in, right? As I said earlier, a diverse set of people, diverse experiences. It's tough in this day and age to get together or to meet such a range of people in such a short time. I think that should be the biggest achievement for this conclave. And of course, the ideas and vision that comes out of this conclave. There are a very distinguished set of speakers here. I'm looking forward to listening to them and understanding more about what the future holds for Nepal and how it shapes up.
Thank you so much. I'm really interested in your session.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Akanksha Tyagi, and I'm from Delhi.
Why do you think this kind of event is necessary?
So this sort of event, whether here in Nepal or globally, this is necessary because to start a dialogue, for any sort of change to happen, be it economically or technology, I'm in an IT panel, or any sort of change to bring in, to any innovation to come up, the dialogue has to be there. So such sort of events, they sort of give a kickstart to dialogues.
Okay, so what is your say specifically about Kantipur Conclave?
I think Kantipur Conclave is doing a really good job. Today is the first day, so I'm really looking forward to it. But the entire buzz that has been created around it, it's very impressive. The way they have curated the entire sessions and the panels, it's very impressive, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. So, what is your expectation? What will you get in the end after this conclave is over?
So, definitely I'm looking towards a lot of learning. I'm looking forward to. There are various sort of panels. There are vernacular panels on the sides of panels that are going on in English. So I'm really looking forward to a lot of learning and understanding how Nepal is to be placed in, say, the next 10 years. But also I'm looking towards certain constructive solutions to certain challenges that will be discussed, whatever field we are talking about, whether it's economy, money, technology. So to see sort of kickstart to some constructive plans. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I am Chandan Sapkota. I'm an economist and senior fellow at Nepal Economic Forum. Right now I'm based in Tokyo. I'm doing my PhD, but I also do a lot of consultancy stuff for different organizations.
So why do you think that this kind of event is necessary in the context of Nepal or
This is a kind of very, in a way, it's non-traditional event. If you look at the set of panelists and moderators for it, you have all young guys, and this definitely will give a younger perspective from younger generations. So there's like very unconventional speakers, but all of them have made a name in whatever field they have been working on. Right?
Okay, and what is your say specifically about Kantipur Conclave?
Oh, this is very well organized. I mean, you can't have a better person than be organizing all these things. Have like tremendous experience with this Himalayan Consensus Summit and all these like international level organizations. And it's been set up very nicely. I'm very happy. All the logistics and everything. You don't have to worry about anything. It's like perfect.
Thank you so much. What do you expect to take with you when Kantipur Conclave is over?
I expect to have to learn a lot from the young panelists that have been doing amazing work in their field, and that would be a very good learning experience, because up to now we've been writing and then we've been producing reports, but it's good to listen to it's amazing broad range of people represented in the among the panelists. So my expectation is that I will learn a lot, and this would actually give on the same development issues that Nepal has and has been facing for decades. But this is a venue where you can actually gauge how young people feel about it. And some of them are entrepreneurs, like trying to create jobs and growth and all this. Their experience would be really good to hear about, and we haven't had that kind of platform, this big stage. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
My name is Sikshit, and I'm the co-founder of Toodle.
Okay, so what do you think about this kind of event and the necessity of this kind of event in the context of
I think as a country we're going through a massive transition, and therefore a discourse that could lead us to the common future was very important. And I'm glad that Kantipur has taken that lead in terms of bringing people from different dimensions, from different works of life, and creating this mega discourse. And I hope that this will be a very important event that will shape up the future of our country.
So what are your views in specific about Kantipur Conclave?
The first thing that I saw after I came here was the size of the event, number one, and the speakers from all walks of life, to people who share different experiences. And I'm sure that this is going to be one of the very, very pivotal steps that Kantipur has taken.
So what do you expect to take with you when Kantipur Conclave is over?
I would at least be able to maybe learn with these discourses what would Nepal be like in 2030. At least having that vision for 2030 for the country is something that I'm really looking forward to learning from this event.
Thank you.
Good morning. Hi. My name is Amish Raj Malmi. I'm a moderator for the session Nepal towards 2030.
Okay, so your first question is, what do you think is the necessity of this kind of program in the context of Nepal?
I think in the context of Nepal, especially since we've got out of such a, it's been a long sort of like a transition period, and we are at a stage where we need a sort of a roadmap for the future. We need to talk about ideas. We need to talk about how we can take Nepal forward. And this conclave, my hope is that we get some new ideas. We get some out of the box thinking, something that will help policymakers, our leaders, our industrialists, the private sector, all of us to sort of converge to bring about a sort of a synergy in how to take Nepal forward.
So what do you think about Kantipur Conclave in specific?
I think it's a great idea.
My name is Abhishek Kumar. I'm managing partner of Rainforest Ventures, an early stage venture capital fund in India.
Okay, so why do you think this kind of event is necessary?
See, it's my first time in Nepal, and it's a pleasure and honor being here for the Kantipur Conclave. And as the tagline suggests, it's called Unleashing Nepal's Potential. I think it's quite interesting to see such a collection of diverse experiences and skills and people with those kind of skill sets come together to think about the ways to unleash Nepal's potential, especially as a young nation with a young population. There's a lot that can be achieved, and for me personally, this visit to Nepal, my first visit to Nepal, has been eye-opening about the kind of depths this country has, the places the economy can go, and that's all possible because of this conclave. It got me here, so I think that's important, to bring together a diverse set of people to ideate on the future of a country. It's a very interesting and very important step.
Do you have anything specific to say about Kantipur Conclave?
My contribution here is about the financial part of this summit. The session is called Where's the Money? That's obviously, as the name suggests, it's about sourcing capital and what an economy and a set of people can do to source capital from different parts of the world. And I'm looking forward to that. I've got very esteemed co-panelists, and it's going to be very interesting.
Sure. And what are your expectations from this event?
As I said earlier, it's about listening to the ideas that all these people bring in, right? As I said earlier, a diverse set of people, diverse experiences. It's tough in this day and age to get together or to meet such a range of people in such a short time. I think that should be the biggest achievement for this conclave. And of course, the ideas and vision that comes out of this conclave. There are a very distinguished set of speakers here. I'm looking forward to listening to them and understanding more about what the future holds for Nepal and how it shapes up.
Thank you so much. I'm really interested in your session.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Akanksha Tyagi, and I'm from Delhi.
Why do you think this kind of event is necessary?
So this sort of event, whether here in Nepal or globally, this is necessary because to start a dialogue, for any sort of change to happen, be it economically or technology, I'm in an IT panel, or any sort of change to bring in, to any innovation to come up, the dialogue has to be there. So such sort of events, they sort of give a kickstart to dialogues.
Okay, so what is your say specifically about Kantipur Conclave?
I think Kantipur Conclave is doing a really good job. Today is the first day, so I'm really looking forward to it. But the entire buzz that has been created around it, it's very impressive. The way they have curated the entire sessions and the panels, it's very impressive, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. So, what is your expectation? What will you get in the end after this conclave is over?
So, definitely I'm looking towards a lot of learning. I'm looking forward to. There are various sort of panels. There are vernacular panels on the sides of panels that are going on in English. So I'm really looking forward to a lot of learning and understanding how Nepal is to be placed in, say, the next 10 years. But also I'm looking towards certain constructive solutions to certain challenges that will be discussed, whatever field we are talking about, whether it's economy, money, technology. So to see sort of a kickstart to some constructive plans. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I am Chandan Sapkota. I'm an economist and senior fellow at Nepal Economic Forum. Right now I'm based in Tokyo. I'm doing my PhD, but I also do a lot of consultancy stuff for different organizations.
So why do you think that this kind of event is necessary in the context of Nepal?
This is a kind of very, in a way, it's non-traditional event. If you look at the set of panelists and moderators for it, you have all young guys, and this definitely will give a younger perspective from younger generations. So it's like very unconventional speakers, but all of them have made a name in whatever field they have been working on. Right?
Okay, and what is your say specifically about Kantipur Conclave?
Oh, this is very well organized. I mean, you can't have a better person than be organizing all these things. Have tremendous experience with this Himalayan Consensus Summit and all these international level organizations. And it's been set up very nicely. I'm very happy, all the logistics and everything. You don't have to worry about anything. It's like perfect.
Thank you so much.
Right.
And, what do you expect to take with you when Kantipur Conclave is over?
I expect to have a to learn a lot from the young panelists that have been doing amazing work in their field, and that would be a very good learning experience. Because up to now we've been writing and then we've been producing reports, but it's good to listen to broad. I mean, it's amazing broad range of people represented in the among the panelists. So my expectation is that I will learn a lot, and this would actually give on the same development issues that Nepal has and has been facing for decades. But this is a venue where you can actually gauge how young people feel about it. And some of them are entrepreneurs, like trying to create jobs and growth and all this. Their experience would be really good to hear about, and we haven't had that kind of platform, this big stage. All right. All right.
My name is Sikshit, and I'm the co-founder of Toodle.
Okay, so what do you think about this kind of event and the necessity of this kind of event in the context of
I think as a country we're going through a massive transition, and therefore a discourse that could lead us to the common future was very important. And I'm glad that Kantipur has taken that lead in terms of bringing people from different dimensions, from different works of life, and creating this mega discourse. And I hope that this will be a very important event that will shape up the future of our country.
So what are your views in specific about Kantipur Conclave?
The first thing that I saw after I came here was the size of the event, number one, and the speakers from all walks of life, to people who share different experiences. And I'm sure that this is going to be one of the very, very pivotal steps that Kantipur has taken.
So what do you expect to take with you when Kantipur Conclave is over?
I would at least be able to maybe learn with these discourses what would Nepal be like in 2030. At least having that vision for 2030 for the country is something that I'm really looking forward to learning from this event. Thank you.
Good morning. Hi. My name is Amish Raj Malmi. I'm a moderator for the session Nepal towards 2030.
Okay, so your first question is, what do you think is the necessity of this kind of program in the context of Nepal?
I think in the context of Nepal, especially since we've got out of such a, it's been a long sort of like a transition period, and we are at a stage where we need a sort of a roadmap for the future. We need to talk about ideas. We need to talk about how we can take Nepal forward. And this conclave, my hope is that we get some new ideas. We get some out of the box thinking, something that will help policymakers, our leaders, our industrialists, the private sector, all of us to sort of converge to bring about a sort of a synergy in how to take Nepal forward. Yeah.
So what do you think about Kantipur Conclave in specific?
I think it's a great idea. I mean, yesterday too, I was telling a couple of organizers, Sujeev, all of them, I was telling them that it's great. I mean, it should have been done a lot earlier, but better late than never. I'm hoping that it becomes an annual sort of a tradition, and I also hope that it goes beyond Kathmandu as well.
Titled or themed, where is the money? I think a lot of us would be very alert in this session to find out answers to the questions for the theme that this session has been set upon. Jim Rogers, a prominent American investor, said, if you were smart in 1807, you moved to London. If you were smart in 1907, you moved to New York. And if you are smart in 2007, you moved to Asia. We have seen many such moves taken by people, and it has been a very smart and successful moves for many. Nepal, our beautiful country, is also in Asia, and we have been talking about how Nepal is ready for investments, the potential that it has, and the benefits that the investors can get. To moderate this session, Where is the Money?, we have Mr. Siddhant Pandey, who is the Chairman and CEO of Business Oxygen Private Limited, the first international SME venture private equity impact fund for Nepal. He's also someone who's left the international banking scene to do something in Nepal, someone who is continuously exploring areas of investment and pushing for more investments into Nepal. So I request our moderator, Mr. Siddhant Pandey, to kindly take the session forward.
Thank you, Sadisha. A very good morning to you for attending this session. Where's the money? I mean, I think we all ask that question to ourselves every morning when we get up, but today we'll be discussing this on a larger macro level. Now, Nepal has made incredible inroads when it's come to the social and political arenas. Our Human Development Index has been incredibly attractive. In politics, we're no longer in conflict. We're a post-conflict nation. We've had our constitution. We, for the first time in decades, have a political system with a government with a two-third majority. But where have we sort of not quite made it up to the mark? It's the economy. It's where the money seems not to be filtering in. So today, we have an incredible group of panelists here. From the private as well as the public sector, multilateral, most of them actually represent the multilateral organizations. To give things in perspective of why the money factor is very important, let me sort of talk a little bit about what is needed by the time we reach 2030. To meet SDG goals, we need $20 billion per year. SDG goals are to be realized in the year 2030. And of that 20 billion, 55% of it is meant to be covered by the government. The 45% has to be covered by the private sector. Now, to actually reach those goals, we need to prop up the private sector. And we also need to have our economy grow at a GDP rate of 7%. For that, you need investments of $2 billion. And for that, you need FDI. And considering the region, we are probably the least attractive nation in terms of foreign direct investment. Now, I hope from the discourse that we come up with today and the solutions will be that we do reach that level of some sort of answers to the question of where the money is. And there are a lot of factors that are in play here. So I'm going to start off with Bhojraj Podel, who is an economist. He is with the Asian Development Bank on secondment with the Ministry of Finance. So my first question is, Bhojrajji, what do you think policy and regulation reforms are very important? There are 17 outstanding policy and reforms that are that needed to be advocated to be implemented before the investment summit. What do you think in terms of representing or being a part of a multilateral organization? What is your role in advising for this to happen?
Hello, Tim.
Thank you, Siddhanti. I'm Bhojraj Podel, currently working with Ministry of Finance as a project management specialist. My role at the Ministry of Finance is to build a trust environment between Asian Development Bank and the Ministry of Finance. The core of the task entails pushing forward some of the key policy reforms. The one is Public-Private Partnership Bill, which the government introduced Public-Private Partnership Policy in 2015. But taking up from there, the government has recently submitted the bill to the Parliament, hoping to be endorsed by the Parliament before the investment summit. The second task entails of developing an integrated public debt act in the context of federalism. The government has established a dedicated public debt management office, which will be bringing all the middle, front, middle, and back office of the debt management under one roof. The practice that is globally considered as efficient one. Once we have the Public Debt Act endorsed from the Parliament, that will lay the foundation for central, provincial, and local governments to use the capital market to finance infrastructures ranging from small, medium to large scale projects. Particularly question that comes from Siddhantiji regarding 17 policy reforms that needs to be done before the investment summit. There is a high-level committee chaired by Finance Minister Dr. Yubraj Khatiwada, and as far as I know, working with the officials from the Ministry of Finance, Planning Commission, Investment Board, and other line ministries, the task of getting these bills endorsed from the Parliament is accelerated, putting much effort, particularly from the Investment Board side. From the Ministry of Finance side, these two bills, as I said, the Public-Private Partnership Bill, Public Debt Act, and one more that is not yet finalized but is being discussed within the institutions, is an act related to mega projects, where a high-level committee will be instrumental to order any institutions at any point to untangle the bottlenecks for the infrastructure developments.
Thank you, Yubraj. I know we are keenly looking at especially the execution of the FITA, Foreign Investment Technology Transfer Act, which is going to be an important foundation for, I think, for the success of the investment summit. But now I'm going to move to the other multilateral organization. Faris Haddad Zervos is the country manager of the World Bank group in Nepal. He has been in Bolivia, Iraq, as well as Malaysia. Faris, World Bank is probably the largest committer of capital to Nepal, with $2.6 billion in 25 projects. World Bank has been extremely instrumental in policy matters, directing the government. Now, in terms of looking at the situation of foreign investment and moving forward, and also to supplement what Bojraj has just said, can you just illuminate us on the role of the World Bank Group in Nepal?
Sure. No, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. It's always difficult. Yeah, okay, maybe this is the good distance. Well, thank you very much, Sid, for that, and happy to talk about, as you mentioned, the role of the World Bank, which is one of many development partners, of course. We have our colleagues and friends from the ADB and many others who are involved, and certainly I'm very happy to say that this year actually is our 50th-year anniversary of working in Nepal as the World Bank Group, which includes the World Bank, of course, and my colleague Aditi here will speak to it from the IFC. So I think we're very much here to support it, because ultimately, if you think, I want to use my very precious time to actually focus on Nepal rather than what the World Bank is doing. But I would just say that insofar as our goal is to support countries and meeting, the twin goals of poverty eradication and achieving shared prosperity, then, our objective in the case of Nepal is actually to support this economic narrative, or this economic storyline of growth, sustainable growth through public and private sector engagement. But I think it's really important because, given that this topic is about where's the money and about development and where the money comes in, if you just bear with me a little bit, I think it's very important, and yesterday we heard it from the Right Honorable Prime Minister, from the other speakers, the keynote speakers, and I think this is where an event like the Conclave is very important, is we need to, all of us, develop a common narrative of what is the storyline, what is the economic storyline for Nepal. moving forward. And then if we agree on this narrative, and we can disagree on how to achieve that narrative, et cetera, which is healthy, but we need to sort of really focusing on, to focus on executing this narrative the day after the conclave is finished, which is, I guess tomorrow or Wednesday, tomorrow. So I think it's really important, when somebody says, how's Nepal doing in terms of the investment climate? And my answer would be, depends. What are you looking at? What is the time horizon that you're looking at? If you're looking at between today and tomorrow, today and next week, it's not doing very well. It could do better. It's better than it was before because we have stability, we have a long-term horizon, and we have this prospect and commitment of, the new FITA law, as my colleague was saying, the Foreign Investment and Technology Transfer Act. We have the PPP Investment Act. We have a lot. So it's better than it was, but it's certainly not in a good place. But if we're looking at it from that horizon, then I would suggest you not invest in Nepal. If you're looking at it from a longer-term storyline, which looks at the history of Nepal, where it was, how it evolved through a series of shocks. They could be political, they could be macroeconomic, given that you have many Nepalis working outside, and they could be related to the earthquake and the floods and the trade, the disruptions, etc. Then Nepal is doing quite well, and Nepal has an optimistic future, and a future we should be optimistic in. Even during this period, and I keep saying this myself, this is a new Nepal. It's a new chapter in Nepal's history. But even in the pre-new Nepal, if you look at it, for instance, poverty, extreme poverty has gone down from over 40, 45%, 15%. Headline poverty has gone to 25%. During this period, the bottom 40, the consumption of the bottom 40 in Nepal actually was double that of the top 60. And this was during the bad times. So there is a positive story to tell. Now, having said that, moving forward, there continues to be a lot of issues we need to focus on. This idea of prosperous Nepal and happy Nepal is a very important one. Reaching middle-income country status by 2030 is a very important one. But if you look at that, in order to reach middle-income country status, even at the current growth rates, by 2030 you're likely to be, and I'm looking at my number, $958, which is less than middle-income country status. To achieve middle-income country status, you need
to ask Abhishek is that India in the past 2 decades has made leaps and bounds, especially in attracting FDI. Today, India has even beat China with $38 billion of FDI this year. China is about 34, 35. And the inflections that triggered this sort of growth in India started off with investments in the IT sector. Now, Abhishek, can you please give us your experience of having been a part of that evolution in India and your contributions and what led to the success of what India has culminated in the IT sector today?
Thank you, Siddharth. So I think if you look at the success, as you mentioned, of India, the success India has had in raising foreign capital, there are 2 phases, right? The first phase started in the late 80s with IT services companies, which we all know about now. So there was Infosys, HCL, Wipro, TCS, and these became very large very quickly, right? Because there was an arbitrage, they had an advantage, and they were solving rest of the world's problems, right? Which much cheaper. The second phase, I think, and that's more important, and that's where I was associated with, was startups, right? You mentioned 38 billion in FDI last year. Startups and high growth companies raised 20 billion out of that. Right? So if you add the acquisition of Flipkart for 16 billion, then almost entirely covers that FDI figure, although we don't add that. But, and you look back at the evolution of this is the startup ecosystem in India, I would say sometime in the early 2000s, 2005, 6, 7, 8, this is when a lot of these startups were founded, even Flipkart, which got acquired by Walmart recently. And what happened then that didn't happen before that, right? Why did we have an inflection point in the number of startups coming out of India? Of course, them getting funded and raising hundreds of millions of dollars was the headline 5 years later. But initially, I feel, and this is what doesn't get covered much, is the fact that we actually had a very thriving angel investment ecosystem, right? We had a series of former entrepreneurs, former executives of these IT companies, which came up in the 80s and 90s, who now had capital to invest and who were willing to take, as you mentioned, long-term patient bets. And these are not large amounts, right?
we hear of, I mean, we went out and raised hundreds of millions of dollars across the world. So the answer to the question, where is the money, is quite simple. I think the question is how to get it. Here, what India did successfully was, I think the government also helped, all the governments since then, is that we let startups develop. We created an ecosystem where they could raise small capital to start off with, angel investment, seed capital. And of course, then the funds came in. There were American funds, there were Chinese funds, and of course now homegrown capital. But I think we can all ask, what can the government do for us? Where can we get money from? I think the answer lies here. I think you need current entrepreneurs, current business families, HNIs, to open up and to start investing in smaller amounts, maybe $100,000 or less, in entrepreneurs they feel have a potential to scale up, scale fast, and execute at scale. I think that doesn't get covered that much in Indian media also and outside India, because it's not sexy enough, right? It's not hundreds of millions of dollars, it's not a multi-billion-dollar exit, but it's very important. That was the foundation of what led to today startups raising, between 15 and 20 billion every year from across the globe.
Thank you, Abhishek. A very important factor here is that a lot of the successful companies in India bootstrap their way into raising funds. And in Nepal, we haven't quite understood that concept, and we feel that investments should come from the investor without actually showing some sort of a track record. But I hope we will be able to in the coming years.
I would just like to add that even, what you should understand as an angel investor is, most asset classes, the returns will flatline over a period of time, whether it's real estate or commodities. Investment in private companies, right, equity of startups, is one asset class throughout the globe which is given disproportionate returns even till date, even in the West, right? You go to the US, you look at equity market returns, bond yields, and the rest, it's nothing. But there are thousands of angel investors investing in Silicon Valley because it still gives a great return. So if you talk purely in financial terms, economic terms, it's a great investment. Yes, the failure rates are high, but then you make more investments. The fact is that unless you do that, capital will follow success, right? You need early success. That's what happened in India. The large funds didn't come to India in 2000, right? It happened later, once we showed that there were startups with a track record, with early traction, quite successful, but not yet that scale as China or the US then. But they came in later. I think first you need to figure out where is the domestic capital. It's there, right? It has to be invested. It's not being invested, probably being invested in traditional assets. And this is not considered as a viable investment. I think that needs to change.
Just to supplement what you've said in Nepal's context, Nepal is an ideal place to start up a business because the cost of starting a business is nowhere as expensive as it would be anywhere else in the region or abroad. And so the cost of failing, which is eventually going to happen in running a startup business, is not going to be so endearing. Now I'm going to target Aditi. Aditi Shrestha is Portfolio Officer at the IFC, sister organization of the World Bank Group. IFC has been incredibly active in working with the private sector in Nepal, from working with SMEs to large hydro projects to providing lines of credit to commercial banks for trade purposes. Aditi, where is IFC heading with this?
Thank you, Siddhant. So IFC, as a development financial institution, our investment priorities are driven more by countries' development needs rather than commercial considerations, right? So our investment priorities, given the context of Nepal, has been around infrastructure, which is power, connectivity, financial inclusion, which you know very well about because we work closely with you, around climate smart investments, and also, given Nepal's challenges, sectors that promote competitiveness and job creation. Right now, our portfolio is of around $75 million in terms of investment and advisory, but we have a really robust pipeline, and we have a target of $1 billion in terms of financing facilitated by IFC within the next 3 to 4 years. We work across sectors, but right now our current exposure is primarily in hydropower and in financial inclusion and financial services. Just to quickly touch upon hydropower, there's a big role for DFIs like IFC to play in this sector because of our ability to mobilize private finance, but also because of our rigorous application of environmental and social standards. We are investing in Upper Trishuli 1, which would be the largest FDI that Nepal has seen. And going forward, we also intend to finance around 1,000 megawatts of hydropower projects. And we also do quite a bit of advisory around hydro. We're working with the Ministry of Environment on environmental standards. We're working with the private sector on both environmental and commercial aspects of hydropower projects as well. If I could talk a little bit also on the financial services side, again, a big exposure there. We work with microfinance institutions and commercial banks, and we have the target of reaching 1 million in terms of unbanked population and 18,000 SMEs through enhanced financial services over the next few years. In terms of microfinance institutions, we have equity investments, and as you mentioned, with commercial banks, we have trade finance lines for risk mitigation and to facilitate international trade. We also have credit lines with these banks so that they can on-lend to SMEs. And as you know, SMEs are very important in Nepal for job creation and also because they are the primary force behind economic growth in Nepal. And of course, I can't forget the work that we do through our SME fund in Nepal. We are invested in Business Oxygen, which you are very familiar with. And Business Oxygen, our fund manager for the IFC SME Ventures Fund, they provide technical assistance and risk capital for SMEs. Again, very important given the large role that SMEs play in the context of Nepal.
Thank you, Aditi. You know, the fact that we really need to demystify this notion that investments should only come into larger projects. Because until recently with IFC's intervention of creating the first private equity fund for SMEs in Nepal, there really wasn't any capital that could address the missing middle. The small and medium enterprises that could not get bank financing because of lack of collateral, etc. So, you know, SMEs carry a bulk of the nation's economy as its backbone, and it is the most neglected area. And IFC's venture into SMEs, Nepal being part of the post-conflict fragile nation category, part of the Global SME Ventures program, identified that need. So, I mean, when we talk to our policymakers and our regulators, they always talk about the larger scenario, the big companies, the multi-million, billion-dollar hydropowers. But if you really want to develop a country really quickly, I think, and create large employment, I think it is the SME sector that needs to be given more focus. Now, I'd like to focus my question to Faris here, who was in Bolivia. Now, Bolivia is another nation which is quite similar to Nepal in terms of its geological location. It is landlocked. It is a small country. It is a socialist country like Nepal. What was the tipping point there, Faris? What is our tipping point in Nepal?
Yeah, testing, okay. Thank you. Well, it's hard, no, thanks very much for the question. I mean, it's hard to sort of, it's dangerous territory when one tries to compare one country with another, but certainly insofar as another country has some characteristics similar to Nepal, Bolivia would be one of them. It's also important to, how would I say, it's important to keep in mind that also Bolivia shares a border with Brazil, which is the biggest economy in Latin America, and second only, I think, to the US, so it's quite huge, and Mexico, so there, and Canada, of course. So there's a lot of similarities. I think the tipping point is, it's interesting, and this is, sorry, I keep going back to the same issue, and I think it's very important here in Nepal that, and this was mentioned yesterday in one of the speeches, that, you know, no country, nobody, certainly in this room, comes from a country that was built in a day. And that applies in the same way to an economy and economic structure. I think, it would be very important to keep in mind that Bolivia's tipping point is yet to be defined. Bolivia has actually exited, in terms of the World Bank, from concessional financing to IBRD. Bolivia is actually now considered by many standards to be a middle-income country, having been the poorest. And the tipping point for Bolivia is one of these things where you cannot pick a specific date, a specific event, but it's actually a whole storyline, a whole string, a whole narrative over time of a constant sort of back and forth and a judicious balance between, and I think this is very important, between pushing for growth, sustainable growth, and shared prosperity. Bolivia is a country that has moved ahead, has led leaps and bounds, but at the same time sometimes has sacrificed growth for some social decisions in terms of distribution, whether it's social protection systems, whether it's labor employment schemes, etc. And I think this is what another similarity that Nepal has with it, in the sense that to actually, to talk about the investment climate alone, I think is very important for people like us. And again, I do think that Nepal is now the right time, if you're a frontier investor, you want to come for the long haul to come in. I think if you look at it from that side, it's very important, but you need to balance our quest to get growth with the fact that growth sometimes comes at the expense of social inclusion and things of that sort. So I think in the case of Bolivia and Nepal, there is an effort to try to bring in growth. I think, and let me be very honest and very blunt here, it is nothing short of astonishing that we are talking about FDI and bringing in private investor with a government that has Communist Party in its title. And I think that is astonishing, and I have to consider that to be a very, very healthy sign. The issue is how to operationalize it. But I think what is really important, what happened in Bolivia, is nobody sat there and said, we must be successful today, we must be successful tomorrow, we must be successful in 2 years. I come from the US. We have, and here in Nepal, you're doing two things in parallel. You're trying to unveil or unfurl a new economic narrative, which is built on maximizing finance for development by bringing the private sector. And you're doing that in parallel with an absolutely profound paradigm shift, which is the creation of a new federal democratic republic. And you're doing that in parallel, right? So this, by its very nature, is not a proposition that will be done in a year, in 2 years, and 3 years. And I think all of us need to stop trying, and I'm not suggesting we are, but it's just taking advantage of it, to stop trying to measure Nepal's success in something we can measure in the next year, 2 or 3. This is something 10 years, 20 years from now we will look back on, as we have done for Bolivia, and then determine that the path was a success. I think it's very important. I myself come from the United States, country reaching its obviously hovering on the 3rd century of its federalism transition, and we still grapple with issues related to federalism. So I think we need to keep this narrative in sight, that Nepal, what's really important is, for now, we have a long-term investment horizon, which has not existed in the past. We have a long-term playground, a long-term ecosystem that is far from perfect, but is changing. And one of the key resources that Nepal has not had in the past, which Bolivia had, and that now it has, is continuity, and I think horizon. And I think that is probably, from an investment perspective, I don't know if you agree or not, it's probably the biggest asset that you should be extracting now. And that requires that we all set our expectations and bring in money right now as soon as possible, because now the horizon is long and the investment and the payback period is much longer. Thank you.
Just to follow up on what you've just said, I just have a quick question for you. Nepal's track record on its macroeconomic indicators have been so far very positive, and hence has been an incredible, attractive nation for the multilaterals to give concessionary loans. I believe not too long ago, Nepal was provided grants by the World Bank, but no more. It's all concessionary loans because our economy has grown to that level. But having said that, the recent macroeconomic indicators show that we are on the decline. And, just around the corner is the investment summit. What is your perception that the investors would have towards Nepal under that context?
Thanks. No, that's, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. I mean, it's a very good question. I think I'm going to bore you to death today, because I'm going to give you the same answer. It depends. You see, decline in what sense? If you look back at the historic average, you've had pretty considerable GDP growth. certainly in the past few years, 7.3, 6.9 this year. The bank is very conservative. I don't know what the ADB is estimating, but our very conservative figure is about 6%, which is quite considerable. The external sector is showing some pressures, obviously. You have balance of payment issue and things of that sort, and there's a concern on that you're basically importing more than you export. But again, evaluating whether this is a good thing or a bad thing is actually something you cannot take at one point in time. You have to look at the whole storyline. So if you break down this issue of imports and you see that most of the imports are actually for capital goods, for machinery and spare parts, right? So if you want to build, you say you want to build Nepal, you want to get to growth, you want to, again, operationalize the federalism thing, which means you have 753 new governments. This is just the palikas that exist, so you have to bring in machinery, computers, things of that sort to unfold it. You also want to bring in the private sector, and private sector investors say, well, we need infrastructure to be in place. I'm not suggesting everything's rosy, right? But I'm just suggesting we take it into thing. So all of that requires the import of goods in order to make that happen. At the same time, whatever things, Nepal in terms of its export has a high import content factor, which means you actually have a lot of goods in your exportable stuff that needs to be imported. So if that creates a balance of payments, then I'd say good for you. Create more of a balance of payment deficit in the short term if it means that you're actually investing in future export capacity in the long term. So if the end result is just to consume and buy stuff that goes nowhere, then that's a bad thing. But if you're actually showing a deficit in terms of the export-import sort of gap, and that's going to capital goods, then actually I think that's a good place to be. So my answer is, as a typical economist, is depends.
Thank you for that positive note. Now, Bozraji, moving forward in terms of project management, keeping in view of where the money's at, what has been your role towards investment? How you are advising, what you think should materialize for Nepal to attract that so elusive money in the future?
Thank you. It's working? Thank you, Sid. I think since the formation of this government, the government is trying to showcase Nepal in the global stage always as a market between two rising economies and vast markets, China and India. And there is, of course, a goodwill from across the globe, including development partners to Nepal. But the huge amount of money that comes to projects like Arun III, Upper Karnali, Budi Gandaki, and other infrastructure projects such as airports that come from mainly China and India. Despite the economic scenario that we have, as far as put forward, a very positive note on that, around the investment summit, if the government can assure investors from China and India that there will be some kind of policy certainty in next 5 and 10 years, then a lot of investors from these two markets, private investors, will be interested. Apart from that, Nepal has some niche products in terms of herbs, medicinal herbs, and if Nepal can find out those, it stays in the global value chain, its position in the global value chain, and Nepal has to promote that perspective so that we can invite investors from other countries. The question that how I am working with the government at the Ministry of Finance to attract the investment, there is a confusion among investors related to public-private partnership. And I believe the upcoming act related to public-private partnership and investment will clarify a whole lot of things. Particularly, government is, as far as I know, is trying to strengthen the capacity of investment board so that it can work autonomously with the investors, promoting Nepal's investment sectors, particularly infrastructures, physical infrastructures. And one point that I would like to add on that is the point, picking up the point from Faris, the 753 local governments, 7 provincial governments, and central government, they can work independently in terms of attracting domestic private investment. They can shape up their own policies and to some extent even provide incentives, even though provincial and local governments are not allowed to give concessions on income tax or all those things, but they can create a favorable environment to attract domestic investment in terms of infrastructure development that has the cross municipalities, cross provincial scopes.
Thank you very much. And you rightly said domestic investment is another indicator of how well we would be able to succeed in attracting foreign investment. May all the other provinces be as successful as province number 3 in terms of booking business in the future. And this is a point of introspection to see why is it that province number 3 is the highest. I mean, it is very skewed if you look at the number of industries that are being registered. Now, going to you, Aditi, we don't have much time left, but I'd like to ask about IFC's role in terms of moving forward, in terms of this investment summit. I know the IFC has been incredibly busy in terms of policy reform measures as well as advising, trying to get the reform measures in place. Can you sort of elaborate a bit on that?
The work that we're doing both on the policy level and to further investments, right? Thank you, Siddhant. I think it's a very important question. For Nepal to reach middle income status by 2030, we need $10 billion per annum in foreign direct investment. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. In terms of focus areas and priorities that we see, in terms of the policy side, it would be on getting more certainty, getting more clarity, and overcoming regulatory challenges from the policy side. For foreign investors to be attracted to do more business in Nepal, we definitely need to also overcome the infrastructure challenges. Skilled workforce is also a problem in Nepal. And as a foreign investor, one of the biggest challenges that I face on a daily basis is the forex controls and the forex risk management that we have trouble grappling with in Nepal. But I would also like to comment on some of the issues that we need to work with the private sector on as well. As foreign investors, we look for local partners, right? Local domestic partners as well. And the private sector, the local private sector here also needs to gear up for foreign investment if they want foreign partners. For example, in the environmental social governance standards, Nepali investors, are really lagging behind. So they need to step up. They need to also show commitment towards financial discipline to not engage in anti-competitive practices. So it's easy to just talk about the regulatory side of it, but the private sector also needs to step up.
Thank you. I'd like to add to that. ESG, environment, social governance issues, very important. And social environment management systems have to be in place. And IFC has facilitated a technical assistantship fund for companies that Business Oxygen has equity in to make them along the lines meet international best standards. So that's another way that IFC has come and supported small and medium enterprises, so that the next round they will be open for investments from larger companies, hopefully coming in to inject equity in it. Now, back to you, Abhishek. There are a lot of risks involved in the journey towards where India has, especially in the IT sector. What were the mitigants? What are the risks that we in Nepal need to be aware of, bearing in mind the benefit of hindsight that you have?
So I think the risks whether in India or Nepal or anywhere else in the world are pretty much in the same categories, right? There is regulatory risk, there is policy risk. in business, we would love to have the government just step aside and let us be, but that doesn't happen, right? And I think the way to control for that is to have communication with the government. So, and the governments need to talk to entrepreneurs, talk to whether it's in IT, healthcare, education, to know what's happening, right? So, if you followed Indian media recently, there's been a big controversy with angel tax, right? A lot of startups started getting income tax notices for raising capital, right? Because in its wisdom, the department thought this is income, not equity investment, right? That happened because there was a gap. Because those tax officers didn't actually communicate with anyone this side of the fence, within the industry. It has changed in India a lot, and not obviously not everywhere, not in every department, but we have had senior executives from large companies now working in the government, right? Nandan is a big example, is the biggest example of that. He started Aadhaar. But even with SIDBI, the $10 billion fund for startups is being handled partly by private individuals, as in they're part of the board, which decides on investments. So for the government, I think that change, which is private sector, people from the private sector and entrepreneurs working in the government or with the government, has been a very big advantage in the last 10 years especially. Beyond that, I think, yes, macro risks will remain. If you're in business, you have to be ready for that, right? There are external factors which you can't control for. Tomorrow, if there's a conflict on our borders, we can't predict that, right? We can't even fix it. But I think as long as you grow, as long as you just try to achieve scale in any business, capital will come, right? We saw that in India. I think the first time I started raising capital, first time I did an investment round, we raised, I think it was 100 crores, right? It was 14 years ago, right? So $15 million. And it was a huge amount for us. It was a different sector, it was in media, but we were so excited about it. But 3 years ago, we were doing deals of $500 million, and it doesn't feel that large. It didn't happen overnight. It took a decade or so for that to happen, for us to start getting these amounts into India. And I think, the lessons for us were work with the government, and the government should work with the private sector. Policies shouldn't be made in isolation. Yes, IFC, World Bank kind of organizations do discuss with the government, but I think the government needs to involve private sector. They need to involve entrepreneurs in these discussions. And then I don't think there would be any issue. I think there would be those usual issues. I mean, in India, we are still getting notices, right, from the income tax department. So those will happen. But because there is consultation, that issue also, the latest one, has been handled, right? That it's been controlled for. There has been no damage. And unless there is consultation, communication, both sides, it will be a problem.
You're referring to the angel investors being taxed?
Actually, it's not them. It's the companies which receive funding, because they were being funded at a very high premium. And so this is private investment, right? You can't calculate the share value and invest at that, because then it won't be any, then you can't raise large amounts. So they had to be told that this is how we do investments, this is how we raise capital. And so it's okay now. But yeah, there was a period of 2 or 3 months when there was a lot of uncertainty, investments had stopped, even in India. And you could fix it because we knew who to talk to, right? And they knew who to listen to or who to discuss with. So people like Nandan and Mohandas, people who are working with the government, are doing a great job on that front.
Thank you. And there's a lesson to be learned here. I mean, I think the private sector needs to be heard by the policymakers, and the private sector has to work with the POP. They have to be in sync with each other. Okay, now I think we are at the fag end of our discourse here, and we're going to open up the floor for questions. You have to go through the app, go to this session, tap into that, and there is a section, I think a section that says Q&A. So we already have several questions already. So I'm going to start reading some of them to you. First one, we'll see who can answer the question the best. We hear a lot about high volume deals, and these are important, but curious to hear perspectives on direct investment programs that target technology-enabled high-tech companies. Are any in the pipeline, especially targeting companies that are at the ideation and or pre-revenue stages, possibly utilizing a PPP approach? Okay, the second question will go by two. With more control and intervention coming in form of regulations, and with many legal hindrances in form of legal procedure, it is very hard for the investor to even think of investing in Nepal. Moreover, with the high corruption from the policy level, how can we maintain integrity of Nepal as a potential country for foreign investment? Now, let's take these two questions. Who would like to answer the first one? I think Aditi, can you? Yeah, please.
The first one, I mean, a lot of it pertains to SMEs, right, which I've already answered, so I won't really delve into that more. But maybe on the IT sector, I will expand it a little bit as well. It's not just the IT sector that DFIs and other foreign investors are looking at. IFC is also considering a few fintech investments as we speak. But interestingly, we looked at sectors other than infrastructure and financial services, of course. The World Bank Group together, World Bank and IFC, we recently came up with a country private sector diagnostic reports where we looked at the smaller sort of investment opportunities as well, which have potential to really change the growth trajectory of the country. We looked at agribusiness, tourism, IT services, and health and education. Health and education also, that would also touch upon the PPP angle, where the private sector can work with the government on service delivery on some areas like technical and vocational education, for example, right, which are sort of more the enabling sectors. In terms of tourism, doesn't necessarily have to be huge tourism projects that we're talking about. We're talking about nature-based, cultural, religious products, right, in tourism, and it could be SMEs as well. In agribusiness, we're again talking about niche products. We're talking about unleashing the potential of Nepal in terms of the diverse agroclimatic conditions that we have. That's another area that we looked at. And interestingly, the final sector, the IT services sector, you've touched upon it quite a bit as well already. Given Nepal's young workforce, the fact that our median age is 23, there's a lot we can be doing. Our mobile penetration, internet penetration is one of the highest in the region. So there's a lot of potential there as well.
Can I add something? Thank you very much. Just to complement what Aditi is saying with a little bit, I think that's entirely correct, and obviously we're both part of the same World Bank group. So I think, going back to the question, this issue on the IT digital economy, I think there is a lot of stuff that needs to be happen, which is very active, sort of actively promoting these ones. But let's not forget the passive part, which is, and maybe this is where I betray my very market-oriented biases, where we can target these things, but we should look at the overall sort of ecosystem for any investor to come. So part of it is looking at these sectors, but then looking at what kind of ecosystem, what kind of bedrock does Nepal have. And the reality is, many people, and again, this is me being very open, with the exception of very few investors that currently exist in Nepal, incumbents, have access to finance so they can open new business. So when we talk about the private sector, we're not just talking about making the existing successful businesses even more successful, but getting all these young entrepreneurs, all these other entrepreneurs who want to come in who don't have access to finance. Just to give you some data that's very important. When we were looking at this, in terms of need for better long-term access to long-term finances. And there were some surveys that were done. 40% of the private sector see access to finance as the #1 constraint why they're not opening a business here. And this applies to IT, to everybody. The financial sector is dominated by the banks. Banks are 87% of financial assets in Nepal. So you have a huge issues. It's very difficult. The stock market needs modernization, and the banking sector and financial institutions account for 80% of the stock market. So the issue is, I agree with Aditi, we need to do all of this, but we really need to look at in a very blind and asexual way in the sense of sectors, you know what I mean, a gender-neutral way, irrespective of any sector. What are the binding constraints to long-term access to finance? Once we build that, then you, myself, Aditi, nobody should be in the business of determining which sectors should emerge. We should let the market come in.
Thank you. The second question on corruption, who would like to take it?
I would like to add one point complementing what Faris said, that in terms of finance and finding where is the money, that what I'm hopeful is that once the Debt Management Act that the central government comes up with and endorsed from the parliament, provincial government and local government will have a foundation for them to operate in the capital market, including central government. That will help us to increase the debt ratio to GDP, which is just 25% at the moment, can go up to 40-45% without disturbing the fiscal stability. Going to the question of the corruption, legal process and all that, we have to look forward because we are at this juncture. And I know we have been saying this since the beginning of the constitution, new constitution promulgation date, but from this point onward, I think I'm really hopeful about the act, that not only because I was engaged while drafting it, but also because it will enable investment board to another level, which will build a scenario where one window service for the investors will be established, having officials from different line ministries or different institutions in one place. The second is there will be a operational mechanism within the investment board office where investors and the domestic investors, foreign investors will have different windows to go and get their approval in a faster pace than used to happen before. The case of corruption, as we know that the doing business climate is bleaker compared to last year, and we have a corruption index going higher. But these things take time. But at the same time, once we have a private sector crowding in the country, then there will be a force that will make public sector to be competent and not be not have a rent-seeking mentality. And in this, from this perspective, the country can attract foreign investors and mobilize the domestic investment.
Okay. Now, someone has to answer the corruption question. Anyone? The question, I'll repeat again, is, with more control and intervention coming to in form of regulation and with many legal hindrances, it is very hard for the investor to even think about investing in Nepal. Moreover, with the high corruption from the policy level, how can we maintain integrity of Nepal as a potential country for foreign investment? Anyone?
I don't want to dominate. I'm happy to answer the risky question.
There are a lot of questions directed to you, Faris, here, so we don't have time for all that, so maybe, but go ahead, why don't you? I think it's very important because...
So the reality is, obviously goes without saying that as the World Bank, we think that corruption itself is something that is inimical, that is antithetical to development, right? The reality is, if you look at the data, it is possible to have corrupt ecosystems where you still have investment. So, and I hate to say that, but the problem is if you look at the payback periods, the types of investments you see in these areas, they're investments with very low payback periods. They usually do not engage in actual investment in infrastructure, in putting in place something in the investment destination. And it's about extracting of resource very quickly. So in reality, you can choose the hard way, which is to tackle this in order to bring in the right investment with the right payback period. Or you can do it the easy way and just bring in investments now, which is usually sometimes even facilitated by these lack of transparencies. But ultimately, they will not going to lead to investment in know-how and technical skills. And there's a lot of studies to show a direct correlation between the transparency and the long-term payback period investment. So insofar as Nepal will rely on this investment to thrust it into middle income status, this has to be longer payback period investment. So by its very nature, it brings in the right money, the right know-how, etc. And I would still say that these policies, everything, and very happy to have the honorable ministers here. This is something we've discussed, I think are necessary and a very important bedrock for Nepal's new economic storyline. They're very important. Now, what needs to be built upon this bedrock are actually 2 or 3 or 4 key facts on the ground, precedents. You know, this is one of these things where you're sort of governed by both Latin law and common law. Latin law creates the framework, but common law creates facts on the ground and precedents of key successful investments that have been documented, that have gone from A to Z. And with that, I still think there's a huge pent-up demand for investment in Nepal as a frontier destination that can be realized very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, one last question before we run out of time here. It's addressed to you, Aditi. It says, what's the perception of IFC and World Bank towards social entrepreneurship? As Nepal has come out of transition period, strengthening the social structure is equally important. Is there any support for social entrepreneurs since it does not return back as regular business, but it does strengthen the base? I have a dream to do so, but we do need numerous support on the path. Could we be hopeful, particularly from this sector, that there is money?
So I don't know if a lot of people here know, but IFC has two departments, 2 units, investment and advisory services. Now the investment services is clearly sort of directed towards commercial sort of payback as well, right? So we need to keep both the development goals and the commercial aspects in mind while doing the investment services. But in terms of advisory, we can definitely work with social enterprises as well. Like I said earlier, environmental, social governance, and sustainability is at the core of everything we do. So we definitely have room to work with social enterprises as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, just want to wrap up the session with a little brief on what was discussed. If you look at the panelists, you'll see that majority of them are all from the DFIs, Development Finance Institution, and we're talking about money. So hopefully next year when we do have this panel discussion, it will be the other side. We'd have more people from the private sector talking about money and not just the DFIs. And that's because the DFIs are attuned with the risk factors that countries like Nepal have, post-conflict fragile nations, and they are willing to be the first entrance to this frontier. And the onus is on us to prove to the world that Nepal is ready for business with the seed capital that the DFIs have provided so far. In conclusion, it looks like we're on a positive track. We need that tipping point. Hopefully there'll be, those reform measures will be passed by the investment summit so that we will see that there will be enormous interest in Nepal and that the investors will come in hordes. Having said that, let's hope for the best. Nepal's on the right path forward, and we should be all optimistic about that. And with that, I think we don't want to take any more time from the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Siddhant Pandey, and to all our panelists for this session on where they discussed where is the money and tried to find out where exactly the money is. They also discussed that there is money and the ways in which we can definitely attract that money and bring that money in our country as well. So the next session we are going to start is going to be Nepal in the global stage. But before we start with the session, I'd like to make a few informal announcements. I'd like to request, especially first, everybody who is near the door to kindly come in and join us inside the hall. I'd also like to request our hotel staff to kindly set up the stage. Once again, to everybody who is outside this hall and wanting to join this session, I'd like to request you to kindly come in and join us. To everybody who's inside this hall, a warm welcome and a humble request to everybody to kindly switch off their mobile phones or keep them in silent mode. I think that keeping them in a silent mode is a more sensible thing to do because you'll have to ask questions through the app, so you'll need your mobile phone for that. So you cannot switch it off, but I'd humbly like to request all of you to kindly keep it in silent mode or vibration so that we don't have any disturbances during the session. So this next session is going to be about Nepal in the global stage. And moderating this session, we have Mr. Sujeev Shakya, who is Nepal's CEO, Chief Eternal Optimist. He's also a columnist with both Kantipur and the Kathmandu Post, and he's also the author of a book, the book Unleashing Nepal. So ladies and gentlemen, with a big round of applause, I'd like to request our moderator, Mr. Sujeev Shakya, to kindly join me on stage. And then I'd like to request our speakers, Honorable Ministers, Honorable Pradeep Gyawali, Minister for Foreign Affairs, and Honorable Dr. Yubraj Khatiwada, Finance Minister, to kindly join us on stage as well. So I'll now hand over the proceedings to our moderator.
Thank you, Sadiksha. It's an honor and a privilege to be in conversation in this session, and this is going to be a 30-minute session. And given the paucity of time, we are not going to have questions from the floor, but as the app is on, I've taken some questions that are coming from the app, and I've noted them. Yesterday, Prime Minister KP Oli made a historic speech here, and perhaps for us, one of the most beautiful ones since he took over last year. It was music to our ears, that the emphasis was very clear. We need more investments, and foreign investments are welcome. I think that was the key messaging we have. And today we have two key ministers in his cabinet, Honorable Dr. Yubraj Khatiwada and Honorable Pradeep Gyawali. Both of them were part of the delegation that went to the World Economic Forum in Davos recently. So today's conversations are going to be on looking forward, as we talk about unleashing Nepal's potential. We are not really here to criticize and to see what are the challenges. I think there are a lot is being talked about. A lot is being talked about what's going wrong. But we are here to look at how we can move forward and how we can recalibrate our economic growth story, and how we can talk about unleashing Nepal's potential. So without much ado, maybe I'll just start off, the discussion with their visit to Davos in January, and we had our Prime Minister and our delegation participate for the first time. Our Foreign Minister and Finance Minister was there, and perhaps this was one of the great times when Nepal was on the global center stage. So what has been sort of anecdotal stories, experiences of your visit? Maybe I'll start with Honorable Pradeep Gyawali.
Thank you, Sujeevji. Thank you for providing us this wonderful opportunity. And thank you to Kantipur Media Group for hosting this very important conclave, which will provide to bring the diverse opinions in one place and to extract the essence. It is, I think, a tradition of this region that we very much give importance to the discourses. Bade bade jayate tattva. It is a famous saying. So I wish every success of this conclave. The invitation to the Right Honorable Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli to Davos and the highest level delegation or representation in that forum is a manifestation of the changed context and growing profile of Nepal. Needn't to say, Sujeevji, Nepal went through a very difficult time during the conflict, and we lost more than 10 years to manage the conflict, to conclude the transition. Transition paved the way for the instability, policy inconsistency. That's why in external front we were unable to tap the potentials to cope up with the changed dynamics of the global economy and global polity. Against this background, our participation in Davos Forum was very important. That provided us an important opportunity to showcase the Nepal's desire and resolve to have a rapid socio-economic transformation to attain the prosperity through the broader participation and the goodwill of the international community, and to share our own experiences on that regard. Some of high-level bilateral meetings, discussion with business sectors, CEOs of famous companies, that all created an environment to make a network for Nepal. And now our effort will be based upon that opportunity and the network to implement or to invite those business community to those circle to be a meaningful collaboration in Nepal's development. So I think our participation was very, very meaningful.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Gyawali. Dr. Khatiwada, what was your impressions about Davos? I mean, it's a place where all the finance ministers, all the businesses come together. So what has been your, any anecdotal interesting experiences, would be useful. That's working.
Thank you, Sujeev ji. Also, let me join my cabinet colleague, Foreign Minister Pradeep Gyawali ji, for appreciating Kantipur Media House for initiating all this dialogue in a much more positive way and taking all of us together to the road of peace, development and welfare of Nepali people. So thank you once again. On the question of Davos, the meetings which our Prime Minister attended and spoke, our Foreign Minister has already mentioned some of them, that we were able to just showcase our development roadmap. And also the world which was curious of this government, because we are the government with hammer and sickle. So although we are elected democratically, people would be curious to know what kind of policies this government has. And we were able to show that we are elected government with full democratic practices. We do take along with the state, the players of the state like the private sector, the community and the cooperative sectors, and we do collectively the development work of the country in such a complementary way that we don't find ourselves to be outplaced to any other. So it's a kind of complementary and kind of collaborative approach we are following. I think we were able to give the message to the world that it is a kind of country where we have any kind of democratic deficit. That was the first point. The second point was how we were able to implement the federation, which Nepal is of course the youngest federal state. So we were there to also showcase how fast we were able to translate federalism into action. And it is in less than 1 year's time that we have been able to fix some of the problems associated with federalism, particularly on sharing resources and opportunities and responsibilities. That's the second. The third one, I think, is having our informal dialogue and also formal meetings with several investors to solicit their investment and their interest towards Nepal. On a personal note, I would like also to mention that some of the sessions were really, really interesting, and that caught my attention, in particular about measuring progress, activity, and welfare of the country. I can see a lot of debate going in this country, people talking about some of the numbers and talking that the economy is going down. The discussion that took place in Davos was more than GDP. It was beyond GDP, how to measure welfare, how to measure progress of a country. Here, GDP is doing very well, but it's not enough. That must translate into the proper welfare of the people. And how can we do that? So that session I found very interesting, and we have really to have our further discourse on measuring our progress and welfare through some other upscaled, or I would say even higher level of indicators other than GDP. That was interesting. One other session which was really interesting was on investment. the global investment trend is declining. That was not a very good news to all of us. But still the global economy was growing and is growing. So we wanted to know what are the causes behind this declining trade, investment, and also the economy, global economy keeping up. And my argument there was that maybe productivity of capital has gone up, efficiency might have gone up. So why do you need more investment if you are increasing the productivity of capital? So I think some of the interventions we could make there also had a lot of attention of the world that we should be looking beyond capital accumulation for growth. We must be looking into the productivity of all the inputs, including capital and labor we put in the process. I think this debate is, it keeps on going, but that was an interesting event. Thank you.
No, thank you. That is, I think it's very interesting for us to learn, because I think watching our Prime Minister live and in Davos, it was also a proud moment for us Nepalis. And we also wanted to hear some behind the stories on what happened and what you learned. Thank you very much. So I would come back to Minister Gyawali in terms of if foreign investment is what we have to seek, if that is what we have to look for in terms of going to events like Davos and seeking, sort of global attention. So that is one time, and there will be a lot of things that we can do. But what is it that we are going to change, or what is happening around some of the conversation we started having was on the economic diplomacy issues, and how would our, sort of foreign policy linked to investments, how would our own embassies go through transformation? Maybe some light on that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes. The major component of our diplomatic conduct has now been shifted towards economic diplomacy, because for Nepal, our diplomatic engagements, our diplomatic activities should serve the national resolve, that is the prosperous Nepal and happy Nepali. To fulfill that aspiration, we need broader global support and goodwill. That's why our diplomatic activities should shifted towards that direction. That's why our ministry is trying its best to make new arrangements on that regard. Very recently, we have developed the country-specific profiles of major countries that will give us basic information, what are the expectations of with that particular country, and what are the potentials of the engagements with that country. So we have developed that type of country-specific profile. Second, I have already instructed our diplomats abroad to focus basically in 5 major areas. If they are serving in the developed countries, please try your best to increase the ODA, though it is not sufficient and its trend is declining. However, by 2020, when we are going to be graduated from the LDC status, and for some years, when we will be able to fulfill the reconstruction projects, reconstruction process, at least for the time being, we need ODA as well. But keeping in the mind that the trend is declining, our major focus is in foreign direct investment. I have already instructed our missions to establish a new profile, a new image of Nepal. What are the major components? Why anybody should invest in Nepal? What are the potentials? What are the opportunities? I have instructed them to at least focus on that regard, the demographic dividend, basically the youths in majority, with vigor, with hardworking nature and their honesty. Growing domestic market with 29 million people and increased size of the middle class. Third, located in the very attractive location among the largest market of India and China, huge potentials, natural resources. These are the major enablers of our economic development. And I have instructed the missions to establish a new image, Nepal as emerging, vibrant economic vibe. Third, tourism is one of the most important component of our economic development. And next year we are going to organize the Visit Nepal Year 2020 to fulfill those aspirations of the 2 million tourists. I have our missions are engaged to branding Nepal. And fourth, Nepali diaspora is very, very important to be a partner of the Nepal's economic journey. So that's why we have established various platforms and mechanisms to engage them in Nepal's development. And fifth, our trade deficit is alarming. It's really challenging. And we are trying our best how we can reduce the deficit, how we can increase our export, how we can increase our products. That's why our missions are working on that regard, and we are trying our best to create a new image of Nepal as an attractive destination for investment.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gyawali. I think it's very refreshing because in Nepal, it's very rare that we would have a foreign minister talking about economy. In Nepal, it's it is always seen as a finance ministry, sort of area, and it's good that because at the end of the day, it is about coordination, and this is really really great to hear this. And so, if we are looking for investments, and if we are pushing Nepal as an attractive investment destination, I think that's what the finance ministry is also looking at, rather than, as we said, not really emphasizing only on the summit, but to really look at sort of what are the sort of broad contours on where we are looking at changing the investment climate, because that's what is going to be key. And for all our embassies to go and say that come invest in Nepal, do something in Nepal, we need to bring about. It's not that the change is not happening, but I think the process is accelerating. We are looking forward to the investment summit too. So how do you see some of the core couple of areas that you're really pushing hard for? Mr. Khatiwada.
Thank you, Sujeev ji. Along with the political stability and new federal structure, which is working in the most democratic way to govern the investment structure and investors of the country, I would like to emphasize on several factors, but maybe due to time constraint, I would like to speak 4 or 5 of them. First, Nepal is an emerging country, emerging market. Also close to the neighboring big markets that our foreign minister has already mentioned. Only an emerging market has the greenfield investment opportunities. In a matured market, you don't get any such kind of greenfield investment opportunities. It could be a kind of brownfield or something others. So, first of all, right from startup to increasing capacity to doing big business, we have the virgin land. So this is the best thing we can offer. But having said that the investment opportunities are there, we have also to create enabling environment. The cost of doing business has to be reduced and the ease of doing business has to be further facilitated. What the investors need, the first thing they want their investment to get attractive return in a safe investment environment. I think if you look at the history of foreign investment in Nepal, most of them, I agree, and I think many of the investors should also agree that they are making good money out of the investment, and they are giving justice to the investors, the shareholders, after paying good tax also to the country and creating jobs and contributing to the exchequer through revenue. So this is already an evident case that if you invest in Nepal, you get good return on your money. And second, while investing your money, your property would be protected. There would be no nationalization, expropriation, or any kind of risk to the property that you can invest. Repatriation is not a problem. Law itself has ensured that the principal, interest, dividend, whatever workers' salaries could be repatriated in a transparent and the most easiest way. And third, we do have a very, I would say, properly managed labor market, whereby our labor law now ensures that there should be no dispute in the industrial relations as the new labor law has been formulated with the tripartite agreement between the employer, employee, and the government. And as you see, there have been no strikes in the last couple of years. That itself manifests that labor market flexibility is there. Those who are laid off, paid off. Their social security provision is mentioned there. And I think that's one of the areas where we can say that we have a strong labor market condition. Not only that, our minimum wages we have settled down, and there should be no debate on the kind of wages, but still wages are low in Nepal. We don't want low wages to be the comparative advantage, but still I would say even after minimum wages, they are comparable in South Asia, or maybe even better. And then some other provisions in the labor market also enable us to create better industrial environment. The infrastructure, which is key to investors. 2 years before, we were talking about power shortage, load shedding and all that. This year, we don't talk much about the power shortage. There are some erratic supplies of power at some point of the day because of the technical error. Otherwise, we can assure quality power supply 24 hours a day. So that's something which we can assure for power-intensive industries. For infrastructure, if you are taking power itself and you need an approach road, if you are doing power itself, generating power and you need a transmission line, and if you need land or forest for the purpose of doing this infrastructure, through the investment board's decision, we have made these things very, very simple. So this is enabling environment. The fourth is the forward-looking legal environment. Foreign Investment and Technology Transfer Act is key to foreign investors, and that has been passed by the cabinet and would be taken to parliament this week. The Intellectual Property Act is drafted, and it would also be taken to the parliament after cabinet approving it. Industrial Enterprise Act is also ready, and the amended Enterprise Act, which also is consistent with the federal setup. The federal, provincial, and local governments being able to manage and regulate industries is clearly defined in the act. And then there are several other acts that includes Investment and PPP-related Act and Public Procurement Act. I could name many of them, but I should not forget the Company Act, which facilitates everything. So legal and regulatory framework, including the bylaws relating to a hedging mechanism and one window for the operation of industries. I think they are some of the ones that I must mention. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's great that, this Kantipur Conclave, we are actually setting the stage for the future discourse in terms of opening up of investment. And as we mentioned from yesterday, what the Prime Minister said, and hearing what you've been talking about in the reforms. But I think as we go ahead in the Investment Summit, we would actually see some of these tangible stuff coming out and some of the tangible commitments from the government on reforms to say that these are going to happen, not only in terms of the laws and the rules and regulations, but in terms of the implementation part of it also. So I think we really look forward to that. I'll just take a quick digression before we come to the final, sort of question to Minister Gyawali on, you'll be visiting Geneva, and we also hear that, the investments are linked to our own challenges on ending up the transitional justice issue. And as the UN Human Rights Council is going to meet, because this is some, as we talk to investors, they do try to link these two issues. So what is going to be, how does Nepal try to put a good closure to this soon? So what's your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Thank you, Sujeev. As we are already saying, Nepal is unique. Unique in the sense that it is homegrown, nationally led, and mostly very successful. We have already fulfilled its political aspect, that is the drafting a new constitution and restructuring the state. We have already fulfilled its combatants and arms and ammunition aspect, and now we are in the final leg of transitional justice. Right Honorable Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli time and again has cleared the Nepal's position that we will finalize transitional justice in the spirit of comprehensive peace accord. We have various commitments in international level. We will pay proper attention on that regard. There will be no any blanket amnesty on the serious human rights violations, but basically we will focus on how we can reconcile the society, how we can heal the wounds of the conflict. So that's why it will I will ask the international community, I will request the international community that please be assured about the Nepal's capability and ability to finalize this process, and it will set an example of the peaceful transition of the conflict. That will the major message I will convey in the Geneva Human Rights Council meeting.
Thank you, Minister Gyawali. So I think it's, time flies. So I think we need to come to our final round. And I think I just thought that, again, looking forward, because our lessons of, again, working in Rwanda has been that we currently are doing the business investment climate study there that feeds into the Davos WEF discussions for 2020 for Rwanda. So if Nepal is going to be at Davos, it should be, next year also 2020 in a bigger way and having side meetings. So what would be some of the, that could be sort of the final comments. What would be the three big things we would be wanting to go and talk about at Davos 2020 next year? What would be those three things? Dr. Khatiwada.
We have to have some more astrology into it, but let me make something predictable. By 2020, we would be saying, Davos, that we would be no more being a landlocked country, least developed country. Landlocked we remain, but least developed we don't have to. We'll be land-linked rather than landlocked. That's what our Prime Minister said in Davos. Why I say so? We would be one of the countries growing very fast, even in the next 2 years' time. As the fastest growing economy, our disposable income would at least cross $1,500 US. We would be having fixed up all the problems associated with investment, and we can say, look, how much infrastructure additionally we have created into the system. What kind of legal, regulatory, and operational hurdles, bottlenecks we have already cleared. How much of foreign investment we have already brought into the country, along with also promoting our domestic investment. And how many jobs we have created in the last 2-3 years' time. And that would be almost the midterm review of the government's tenure also. So by that time, we have also to deliver many of the things. We don't have any excuse then that we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the legal background, we don't have the federal setup been fixed up yet. Then we have to do many of the things before that, and we'll be able to tell the world that we can do development, we can deliver development in a peaceful and more justified manner, and our growth would be job intensive. People would get job along with fair wages. Factors of production, all, including entrepreneurs, would get their fair share of the risk they have taken. So Nepal would be one of the destinations best suited for not only investors, but also for the people visiting Davos to come to Nepal. Not that Davos is the only place to visit in the world. Nepal is not less important or attractive to visit the country. That message we have to give in 2020.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great set of commitments. Mr. Gyawali, any of your final thoughts you have as we are looking ahead? It's a good, sort of a destination to have, 2020. And we talked about tourism and all. Quite 2-3 things that are coming into your mind.
First of all, I would like to say that a strong, stable, prosperous Nepal is not only in the favor of Nepali people, but it is also in favor of our neighboring countries and the global community as well. So that's why where we are in the springboard of the rapid economic transformation, we very critically need the broader support and goodwill. Nepal's foreign policy fundamentally is amity with all and enmity with none. All countries which have engagements or not with Nepal, they all are friends, and we want a broader development partnership and collaboration with them. We want to learn from them. We want to be a part of them. And second, we are talking about the Nepal in global stage. Unfortunately, the global stage is not very favorable for the countries like Nepal, for the LDCs, for the LLDCs. Existing global order is in jeopardy. Assistance is declining. It is a challenging time. However, we will manage. So it is the right time to support, to encourage countries like Nepal, which just completed the transformation. So that's why we we request the global community, our friends, to be a constructive, meaningful, and substantive partner of development endeavors of Nepal. Thank you.
No, thank you. This is very interesting, and I think we can really look forward to next year, Nepal in 2020, Davos 2020, and I think we'll have the next Kantipur Conclave at the same time. We'll again hear what happened in 2020, and I think perhaps it will be interesting to also have the World Economic Forum Nepal meet in 2020. We should have a World Economic Forum Nepal meet in 2020 so that we bring the world to Nepal as we move into the global stage. Thank you very much to Minister Khatiwada as well as Minister Gyawali for your, sort of taking time off your busy schedule and joining us in this conversations. This has been amazing, again, insight into what is happening, and again, a fresh breath of sort of air in terms of trying to look at Nepal from a new pair of lenses, and again to see how we can unleash its potential. Thank you very much.
Indeed, thank you very much to Mr. Sujeev Shakya and honorable ministers for this session where they discussed Nepal in the global stage. I think Nepal in the global stage is slowly but surely starting to know or be known for all the right reasons. We are a country that is starting to open up and be ready for investments, a country that wants to take development, sustainability, and conservation hand in hand. And like Right Honorable Prime Minister Mr. K.P. Sharma Oli yesterday mentioned, a country moving from a landlocked country to a land that connects, a land that bridges, and a land that links. So with that, we end this session before lunch. Thank you everyone for joining. Please make sure that you download the app of Kantipur Conclave so that you can ask the questions through the app itself. Thank you very much to our moderator and our panelists for this session. And I'd like to request everyone, all our guests, to join us for lunch. The lunch break is for 45 minutes. Sorry for emphasizing on that because we're running a short behind on time. So I hope to see you all in the next 45 minutes here in this hall.
सपनाको आरम्भले जब विश्वास मनमा भर्दछ एउटा
ल म हिँडे है आफ्नो बिग ट्रेकको लागि
सपनाको आरम्भले जब विश्वास मनमा भर्दछ त्यही विश्वासको साथमा
वाउ यो फिलिङ्स बुझाउनै सक्दिन तपाईहरु आफै आएर हेर्नुपर्छ
प्रेरणा मिल्दछ त्यसैले देख्छु सपना उदाहरण बन्ने आज भोलि
सोनाम टुवर्सको पहिलो गाइडेड ट्रेकमा स्वागत छ
सपना जुनैहोस् हामी भोलिलाई अझ सुन्दर बनाउनेमा विश्वास गर्छौं एनसेल आज भोलि सधैँ सँगै
ल म हिँडे है आफ्नो बिग ट्रेकको लागि विश मी लक
आरम्भले जब विश्वास मनमा भर्दछ त्यही विश्वासको साथमा
वाउ यो फिलिङ्स बुझाउनै सक्दिन तपाईहरु आफै आएर हेर्नुपर्छ
प्रेरणा मिल्दछ त्यसैले देख्छु सपना उदाहरण बन्ने आज भोलि
सोनाम टुवर्सको पहिलो गाइडेड ट्रेकमा स्वागत छ
सपना जुनैहोस् हामी भोलिलाई अझ सुन्दर बनाउनेमा विश्वास गर्छौं एनसेल आज भोलि सधैँ सँगै
ल म हिँडे है आफ्नो बिग ट्रेकको लागि विश मी लक
आरम्भले
I have a dream. मेरो सपनाको नेपाल हुनेछ. We have overcome much to arrive at today. We have survived. We have survived years and years of feudal rule, an absolute monarchy, a rudderless democracy, a horrific civil war. We have survived a crippling earthquake and a paralyzing blockade. We have survived these vicissitudes because we are a resilient people. But mere hardiness is not the sum of our character. We have always known that there would come a time when we as a people would achieve our full potential. That time is now, and we must heed its call.
The call of the fierce urgency.
Call of the fierce urgency. The fierce urgency of now. NIC Asia presents the Kantipur Conclave, connected by Encel, powered by Asian Paints. मेरो सपनाको नेपाल हुनेछ.